Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy ate kitsu no fruit? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Pikachu Girl XX for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. 6-year-old Luffy was sitting at her usual spot in the bar when those noisy guys showed up. They came in and laughed, and danced and sung. All day long. Luffy could barely sleep. She lived right above the bar, and the same group was there every night. Luffy couldn't stand it anymore. She walked down the stairs in her red pajamas. "Shut up!" she shouted. The bar was silent. "Luffy!" Makino ran up to the young girl. "No! Makino! I can't sleep. I'm tired. I'm hungry. And I want food or rest. And I don't think you want me to eat all the food again," Luffy threatened. Makino motioned for Luffy to keep her voice down. "Who's the kid?" a straw-hatted man asked. "This is Luffy, she's staying upstairs," Makino said. "Where's her parents?" another asked. "I ain't got any parents. Just a power freak of a grandfather," Luffy shot angrily. Then, she walked down the stairs and sat in her usual chair. "Meat," she demanded. Makino sighed and brought her a plate of meat, which she downed in seconds. "More please," Luffy said, a bit more nicely, and was presented with another plate. She downed the next plate, and the next. "You eat a lot for a little girl," a voice came. Luffy looked to the side. The seat next to her was occupied by the straw-hatted man. Luffy looked away. "You look stupid," Luffy said, biting into another piece of meat. "So blunt," the group yelled. The man fell over. He got back up on his seat. "I'm Shanks. I'll have you know, I'm a great pirate girly," Shanks shot. Suddenly, the small girl's attitude changed. Luffy stared at the man in fascination. "You're a pirate," she smiled. "So cool. I'm a pirate too," Luffy grinned, spinning in her chair, drinking some milk. You're a pirate?" Shanks broke out laughing. Luffy glared at him. "Yeah," she stated. "Luffy, I swear, if your grandfather heard you," Makino lectured the small black-haired girl. Luffy looked up at Makino. "It's not my fault Grandpa left me here," she glared. Then she chewed on another piece of meat. "Freakin' Marines," she muttered. "Luffy," Makino gasped. The pirates laughed. "I'm liking this kid," Shanks grinned. "Your grandpa's a Marine?" he asked. "Yeah, Grandpa Garp," Luffy said. The bar was silent. "GRP," they yelled. Luffy nodded. "I'm Monkey.D. Luffy, he's Monkey.D. Garp." She shrugged. "I don't got a dad, but he said he's my grandpa." The next day, Luffy came down, and sure enough. "Oh, Luffy," Shanks waved. Luffy, in a red vest and blue shorts, hopped down the stairs. She jumped into the seat next to Shanks. "Hiya," she smiled. "Hey Shanks, are you staying long?" Luffy asked. Shanks shrugged. "Not sure. There's not really anything interesting around here," he said. "What do you mean? Haven't you met the dangerous animals? Haven't you seen all the treasures?" Luffy asked. Shanks stared at her. "How would you know that?" he asked. "I told you. I'm a pirate," Luffy grinned. Shanks flicked her forehead. "Yep. Now tell the truth," he laughed. "Fine. My grandpa used to desert me on different islands around here. There's some really dangerous places around, you know," Luffy said. Shanks smiled. We might stay longer than I thought," he said. "Yay," Luffy smiled. Shanks was gone the next day, but he came back the day after. "How was your trip?" Luffy smiled. "Great. Wanna see the ship? We found tons of cool stuff," Shanks told her. Luffy smiled. "Really?" Luffy cheered. "Yeah," Shanks said. Luffy grabbed his hand and they walked off to the ship. The crew was happy. "Hey, it's Luffy!" they cheered. Luffy smiled. "Hey, Shanks. You should take me with you, she said as he carried her onto the ship. Bring you where? Shanks said. Out to sea, Luffy smiled. Can you even swim? Shanks asked. Luffy looked to the side. You can't, can you? Shanks laughed. Luffy glared. Can too, she said. She kicked off her shoes and stood on the ship's railing. Watch. She jumped off the ship. Shanks ran over to the side. Hey! Are you insane? He yelled. Luffy was flailing in the water below. Help! She cried, going under. Shit! Luffy! Shanks yelled, diving in after her. Luffy and Shanks sat at the bar. Shanks was laughing. Haha! You sunk like a hammer. Shanks laughed. Luffy glared. Shut up. It's not my fault, she yelled. Hammer! Shanks pointed and laughed. Luffy jumped down from her chair and stomped to the other side of the room. She was hoisted up by her dress collar and set down on someone's lap. She looked up to see Shanks's first mate. Oh, it's you, Luffy said. You seem down, he said. Yeah, well, Shanks keeps making fun of me. Well, Luffy-chan, you have to see it from his perspective. You're too young to be a pirate right now. He just wants what's best for you. Luffy looked over at Shanks, who turned around. Anchor girl. He pointed and laughed again. Luffy glared. See, she shouted. Shanks's first mate laughed. Or he's just having fun. Shanks looked back. Ah. I'm sorry. Luffy. Come on. Don't be mad. Shanks whined. Luffy jumped down and ran over to him. You're such a jerk, Shanks, she said, finishing her milk. Yeah, but you love me, Shanks said, rubbing her hair. The next day was just like any other. Luffy got to go on the ship again. But this time, she stood on the ship's head, a knife in hand. Now I'll show you I can be a pirate, Luffy shouted down at Shanks. Oh yeah? What are you gonna do? Shanks smiled. Then he laughed. You gonna sink again? Anchor girl? He laughed harder. Luffy glared, then she held up the knife. Shanks watched curiously. Luffy held the knife to her face and sliced a deep cut under her right eye. Shanks's eyes widened when it started bleeding heavily. Ow, ow, ow. Luffy stared, crying, dropping the bloody knife on the deck. Shanks grabbed the crying girl off the head and half ran back to the bar. Jeez! You idiot! He shouted. Luffy was still crying. The whole crew joined Shanks after Luffy got her eye patched up. She was sitting next to Shanks with tears in her eyes. That didn't hurt one bit. She sniffled. Shanks laughed. You really are just a kid. He laughed. I am not. Luffy shouted. My punch is as painful as a knife. Shanks rubbed her hair. Fine, fine, here, drink your juice, Shanks said to the small girl. Luffy smiled. HAA. Thank you, she said, spinning around and chugging her juice. Shanks started laughing. Haha. See, you are a kid, he laughed. Luffy spun away from him. Then, 3 of Shanks's crew members smiled down at Luffy. Ah. Cheer up, Lu-chan. One cheered, handing her a large piece of meat. Yeah. You'll be a pirate someday, the other smiled. And it's the best. The third one grinned. Luffy smiled at them. Yeah. She grinned, biting out a big chunk of the meat. Don't encourage her, Shanks joked. We're just telling the truth. The men laughed. Then, the door was kicked open. Everyone got quiet. A mean-looking bandit and his friends walked into the bar. Makino edged Luffy up to her room. Luffy grabbed a box off the counter. It looked like something important. But when she opened it in her room, it was just a fruit. And a nasty-tasting one at that. We want 10 barrels of sake, the leader said. Makino smiled nicely at them. We're out of sake, sorry sir, she said politely. Out of sake? Then what are these pirates drinking? Water? The bandit said in disgust. Shanks sighed. I guess that is too bad. We seem to have drunken all the sake. But you can have this. Here, it's not even open. Shanks held up a bottle. The bandit sliced it, spilling the bottle all over Shanks and the floor. Listen. I'm a mountain bandit with a $8 million bounty on my head. You're nothing but a low-down pirate, the bandit said, then he began walking away. I'm sorry, Makino, Shanks said. Do you have a broom? No. I'll get it, Makino said. The bandit stopped and turned. Using his sword, he sliced every bottle on the shelf behind Makino. There. If you like to clean so much, clean up that. He laughed before walking out. The bar was silent. Are you okay, Mr. Captain? Makino asked. No, I'm fine. He started laughing, so did all the others. Wow, he got you good, Captain. Someone laughed. Why didn't you fight back? Everyone turned and saw Luffy, sitting on the stairs. She spoke in a small, low voice. Well, spilled sake is nothing to fight over. Shanks smiled. Luffy shook her head. But he made fun of you, he messed up Makino's bar, Luffy said. But no one got hurt, did they? Shanks said. Luffy looked angrily at him. You're a pirate. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you do something? Luffy. I was wrong. You're no real pirate, Luffy said, starting back upstairs. Luffy, wait, Shanks said, grabbing her arm. Except, it wasn't an arm, it was a red paw. Shanks looked at the girl and saw 2 red fox ears sticking from her head. The bar screamed. Luffy looked back. She saw a big red fluffy tail swishing in annoyance. Then, it puffed out in fear. What the hell is this? Luffy screamed. The bar was in a panic. Luffy's tail was swishing in fear. She pawed at her new ears. How do I change back? Shanks! Luffy cried. Shanks noticed her eyes were red and cat-like now. She had fangs too. Captain? The box is gone, someone said. Shanks looked around. Luffy, did you eat a strange fruit in a box? He asked. Yeah. It was gross, Luffy said, sticking out her tongue, which seemed longer now. Shanks held Luffy upside down. He started shaking her. Spit it out, he shouted. When it was clear the fruit was a good way inside Luffy, Shanks flipped her over. That was the fox fruit. It makes any human a half-breed fox. You're a devil's fruit user now. You'll never swim ever, Shanks explained. Luffy started crying. I wanna swim, she whined. I wanna change back, she yelled again. Suddenly, her ears shrunk into her head, her paws turned into hands, her tail shrunk back into her backside, her eyes went back to their usual brown, and her teeth went back to normal. Luffy kept crying. Shanks stared in amazement. Well, you're back to normal, but you still can't swim. I'm really sorry, Luffy. We shouldn't have left the fruit out like that, Shanks said. The next day, Shanks was gone. Luffy was sitting at the bar alone. She had her fox ears and tail out. She enjoyed them. The tail helped her sit, and it was comfy when she slept. The ears, well, Makino said they made her look cute, so she kept them up to amuse her. Do you miss Shanks? Makino asked when Luffy spooned her frosting sadly. No, Luffy said defensively. I'm still mad. He didn't even try to stop him. Now your bar's wrecked, Luffy said, pointing at the damp countertops. I thought he was cool too. What a letdown, Luffy sighed, eating another spoonful of frosting. I think it was cool he was able to laugh at it. Makino tried to convince the small girl not to be angry with the pirate. You don't get it. You're not a pirate. Sometimes, you need to fight, Luffy shot. I guess I wouldn't understand that. Makino smiled as Luffy spooned the last bit of frosting into her mouth. Then the door flew open. Makino looked up and saw the bandits entering. They were laughing about something. Luffy looked back at them, then looked away, tail swishing in annoyance. Looks like those pirates aren't here today. No wonder it was so quiet. The leader laughed. Another bandit laughed along. You got them good yesterday. Yeah. Who would have known the guy was such a coward? Another said. The bandits laughed. Then, they continued to bash Shanks's crew. Luffy angrily bent her spoon until it snapped. Such morons. The leader laughed. Luffy couldn't take it anymore. She whirled her claws out and pounced on the bandit leader, giving him a nasty scratch across his face. The bandit winced in pain. Don't talk about Shanks like that, Luffy spat. She banged the bandit's head on the ground. Luffy, stop. Makino tried to pull the girl up, but Luffy just scratched the bandit's face again, then Makino pulled her away. Don't talk about Shanks like he's an idiot, Luffy screamed, wrenching herself from Makino and facing the bandit. Later on, Makino ran to the mayor. It's Luffy, Makino breathed. Those bandits. They took her. Luffy kicked and screamed. Let me go, she shouted. She was being held by her shirt. She had shrunk her tail back when they grabbed for that. Her ears went with it. I'll scratch you again, Luffy threatened. Calm down, little kitty, the bandit leader sneered. I'm a fox, Luffy growled. It sounded like an animal's growl too. Luffy swiped at the man with her claws. He moved her away, then Luffy snapped, fangs barred. Every time they swung at her to punch or kick, a defense puff of red fur popped out and blocked it. Luffy was surprised when she wasn't hurt. But that didn't matter. The man threw her on the ground and stepped on her stomach. I could get some big bucks for a kid like you, he smirked. Who wouldn't buy a cute little fox girl? He let out a laugh. A shout came from beside them. Please don't. It was Makino and the mayor. We'll pay you, the mayor said. Just please, let Luffy go, he begged. Looks like someone has some sense. The bandit chuckled. But this kid pissed me off, she has to pay somehow. The man drew a sword and held it to Luffy's forehead. Luffy froze, then blade poked into her head. Luffy screamed in pain as the man pushed in the point of the katana and pulled it out one time. Blood trickled down her face. What's wrong, Luffy? I thought your punch hurt like a knife. Luffy looked over to see Shanks, standing with his crew. Shanks, Luffy called. Shanks looked down and saw the trail of blood coming from Luffy's head. He grew angry. He began walking over. No! Don't take another step. Or do you want this pretty face covered in scars? The bandit smirked, running the dull end of the knife on Luffy's cheek. Shanks stopped. A gun was being held to his head. So I assume you're ready to bet your life? Shanks asked. The bandit had a confused look on his face, until he was shot himself. The crew had beaten most of the bandits, who were trying to comprehend the loss of their teammate. That was dirty, the leader yelled. You think you're facing saints? We're pirates. Shanks's first mate smirked. The bandit panicked. So cool. Luffy grinned, ignoring the throbbing headache she had. The bandit threw down a smoke bomb. He grabbed Luffy and tossed her over his shoulder. Hey! Let me go! Shanks! Help! She yelled, clawing at the bandit's back. The smoke cleared and Luffy was gone. Shanks had a mental breakdown. Shit! I got careless. He took Luffy. My Luffy! Our Luffy! She's in danger. Where'd they go? Luffy! Luffy! Shanks ran around. Hey! Captain? The crew said nervously. We'll find her. I heard her screaming. They went off in that direction, I think. Someone piped in. Shanks thought. Let's split up and find her. I'll go to the sea. The crew nodded and ran in every direction, desperately trying to find their adorable wannabe pirate girl. Luffy crawled to the very edge of the small boat the bandit had stolen. She looked nervously at the water. Who would have thought a mountain bandit would escape by sea? The bandit muttered. Luffy glared. Let me go. I want to go home, Luffy shouted, wrapping her tail around her legs. The bandit glared at her. No way, kid, you're going to pay for this. The bandit pointed at his scratched face. Luffy inched farther away when the bandit reached out to grab her tail. She willed the tail away and pressed her back to the front of the boat. The bandit chuckled and lifted her up by the front of her shirt. Put me down! Luffy kicked, clawing at his arm. The bandit winced in pain. You little brat. I have no use for you anymore. The bandit tossed Luffy into the water. Luffy sputtered and kicked, but her strength flew away, and she fell deeper into the ocean. Luffy floated lifelessly in the water. Her lungs were screaming for air. She couldn't move and she felt her consciousness fading. I'm drowning, Shanks. Help! Luffy thought as loudly she could. But instead, she was met with a giant sea monster. It was coming at her fast, and looked hungry. Luffy stared at it. She had decided long ago she didn't fear death. If she was to die here, then that was that. But she could hear it. The monster, instead of eating her, it looked upon her with sympathy. Poor child, the monster rumbled. Luffy could understand it too. She reached out a hand and thought towards the monster. Help me. I don't want to die, not like this. The monster seemed to understand. It studied her for a moment, then it used a claw to push her up to the surface. Luffy sputtered and coughed, breathing in a gulp of air. She was met with the bandit, who looked at her in surprise. A loud roar came from behind Luffy. She found herself being lifted from the water on top of the monster's head. Allow me to assist you, the monster growled. Thank you? Luffy smiled down at it. Luffy slid down the monster's back as it dived down on the bandit, swallowing him with a loud crunch. Shanks dived into the water. He heard Luffy screaming for him. He was sure of it. He saw a giant sea monster dive down into the water. It hit a mountain and knocked Shanks under. The rocks fell on him. He looked around and saw Luffy desperately trying to hang on some wood. He saw the monster swimming under her. Thinking she was in danger, he pulled at his arm. It was stuck. He was sure it was broken. He unsheathed his katana he took for battle and sliced down. Then he was swimming for Luffy. He met with the monster who snapped at him. Shanks used his haki. Get lost, Shanks glared. The monster hesitated, then swam away. Shanks swam out from under the water and found the small girl still gripping a piece of driftwood. Shanks picked her up and looked around. What happened here? He asked. The monster. It saved me. Luffy smiled. Then, Luffy looked down and started crying. Whoa, what's wrong, Luffy? Hey, you're alright now? Shanks asked, smiling at her. But, Shanks, your arm, Luffy cried. He had done that to save her. He had cut off his own arm. Luffy, it's nothing. As long as you're okay, Shanks said, carrying her out of the water. The next day, Shanks and his crew brought their supplies onto the ship. Luffy and Makino came to see them off. So you're not coming back? Makino asked. Shanks shook his head. No, we've had all the adventures we could, Shanks said. Then he looked over to Luffy. She had her tail and ears out, both fallen in sadness. Shanks knelt down to face her. You sad to see us go? Shanks asked. Luffy shook her head. Not really, I'll see you again. And I won't ask you to take me with you anymore. I want to be my own pirate. She smiled. Shanks stuck out his tongue. I wouldn't want you to join my crew anyway. Anchor girl. Shanks laughed. Luffy glared, her tail fur bristled. I'll be a way better pirate than you. I'll have a better crew than you too. And I'll be king of the pirates. Just you watch, Luffy shouted. Shanks stood up. Is that so? There was a small tearing noise. Luffy felt something cover her eyes. Her ears poked through 2 holes. She opened her, felt her head, and a straw hat was perched on top. Then you'll need this. Shanks smiled. Tears flowed down Luffy's face. Her ears twitched in the small holes made in the hat. She jumped on Shanks. Please don't leave, she cried. Shanks smiled. What? I thought you were gonna be a better pirate than me? Shanks laughed. Luffy stood up. Yeah. Next time I see you, I'll be the pirate king. Luffy smiled. The crew boarded the ship, waving as it left. Bye, Luffy. Stay safe. Bye. I'll never forget you guys, Luffy called back. When the ship was out of sight, she gripped the hat on the top of her head. It wasn't long after Shanks left that Garp showed up. That pirate was here, Garp exclaimed when he came into the bar. Luffy was playing with a cat she found. She looked up. Her grandfather stared at her in disbelief. She was in her full transformation. Her eyes were cat-like and red. Her teeth were fangs. She had paws for hands and feet. Her tail was swishing back and forth, and her ears were sticking up through the holes in the straw hat. Yo, Grandpa. Luffy smiled, showing her sharp teeth. Her grandpa grabbed her. What happened to you? He asked. I ate the fox fruit. Shanks brought it. Luffy smiled, changing back to her human form. Her grandpa angrily sat her down in a chair. Did he hurt you? Did he force feed you the fruit? Garp asked. Luffy shook her head. Nope. He was really cool. He even gave me this hat. I can't wait till I'm a pirate like him. Luffy smiled. Garp let his head fall. I knew I shouldn't have left you here, he said, picking up Luffy. He looked over to Makino. I'm bringing her somewhere she won't get into trouble. He started out the door. Makino waved. I'll see you soon, Luffy, she called, and that was that. Garp half-dragged Luffy through the woods. I don't want to go, Luffy cried. Well, you're gonna go, Garp said. Luffy clawed at a tree and it fell on Garp's head. Why, you little? He held Luffy up and stuck her in a tree. And guess what else? Luffy shot. What now? Garp asked his granddaughter. I'm not just gonna be some pirate. Luffy smiled. Garp pulled her down. So, you finally came to your sense, did you? He smiled. Luffy flipped her hat up. Yep. I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Luffy smiled. Garp angrily tucked Luffy under his arm. This is that red hair's influence, he grumbled. Luffy looked at where they were going. Garp set her down and gripped her hand. Luffy, in her human form, walked alongside him until they came to a small hut in the woods. Wait here, Garp instructed Luffy. Luffy did as she was told. Garp went up to the door and knocked. A woman with unruly orange hair screamed, then opened the door. Garp, she said, looking scared. I need a favor, Dayton, Garp said. Dayton watched as Garp turned. Luffy, come over here, he called. Luffy ran up and stood next to her grandfather. Who's the kid? Dayton asked. This is my granddaughter, Garp said. Your granddaughter? Dayton yelled. Garp nodded, then turned to Luffy. You'll be living here from now on, he told the little girl. Dayton was taken aback. What? No way. Ace is a handful in himself, she said. Luffy pouted. I don't want to live in this dump anyway, she said, running off to explore. Why, you little Dayton was interrupted by Garp. Now then. It's either take my granddaughter, or I can report you to the Navy, Garp said, arms crossed. Dayton looked at the little girl. She didn't look like too much work, but she had an attitude. She guessed she could deal with that. Fine, she agreed. A 9-year-old boy, Ace, sat on the meal he had caught. He watched as his adoptive grandfather as he brought a small girl in a red shirt, blue shorts, and a straw hat. She was running around while Garp made a deal for her to stay in the house with Ace and the bandits. She seemed to notice he was there. The girl walked over to him and looked up. Ace threw a pebble down, warning her to stay away. She didn't seem hurt. Ace could have sworn he saw something red pop up where the pebble was supposed to hit. She felt that spot. Why'd you do that? The girl asked. Ace didn't answer. He just hopped down from the large animal he had killed and dragged it to the house. Oh, Ace. Garp grinned at him. Luffy. This is Ace, he's your new friend. He should be a better influence than that pirate you've been hanging around with. Ace looked over at the little girl. She looked angry. Don't talk about Shanks like that, she yelled. Ace's eyes widened. Did that girl just say Shanks? This girl was friends with the red-haired pirate captain, Shanks? Luffy waved at the boy Ace. He was older than her, she could tell. He was also giving off an angry vibe. Maybe she could learn to be friends with him, even if he threw something at her. Shanks taught her that it was nothing to be mad about, nothing to start a fight over. So she forgave and forgot. Hi. Luffy smiled, then she looked at the animal. Wow. Is that dinner? Did you catch that yourself? Luffy asked as Garp left. Ace ignored her. Later, they were inside. The fight for food began. Ace got first dibs because he caught it. Luffy, however, had to fend for herself. And since she refused to fight over food that she could catch herself, she went out to catch her own meal. I'll be back, I'll get my own food, Luffy grumbled, walking out the door. Suit yourself, girlie, don't blame me if you get killed, Dayton said, eating her own food. Ace was curious to say the least. He finished his food and silently followed her. Ace expected the girl to simply get some fruits or something. After all, she was small and weak-looking. But to his surprise, the girl took on an ape 10 times her size, and she was unarmed. Ace watched as claws shot out of Luffy's fingers. With fox-like agility, the girl sliced the ape more times than Ace could count. The ape fell dead. Luffy sighed. She really didn't want to hurt the poor thing. But it attacked her first, so she finished the fight. She willed away her claws and started a fire. You're more capable than I thought. Luffy turned and saw Ace. She started frying her food. She handed some to Ace. I'll share if you're still hungry, Luffy said. Ace shook his head. I can fend for myself, he said. Luffy shrugged and put some food aside for later the next day. Then she finished her large meal and put out the fire. Ace thought having this girl around would be useful. He could catch twice the amount of food with her help. They started back, staying in silence. Ace finally turned to her. How did you beat that ape without a knife? I saw it was cut in places, but you didn't bring a weapon. Luffy held up her hand and claws shot out of her fingers. I ate a devil's fruit, she said. Ace was surprised, but he kept walking. The next day, Ace headed out. Luffy ran out after him. Ace. Wait. Where you going? She called. Hey. Luffy. Dayton yelled. I'll do it later, Luffy yelled, without knowing what she was about to be asked. Then she ran after Ace. Ace tried to lose her. Luffy was persistent. She followed him all the way to the bridge. Ace pushed her, and she fell off over the cliff the bridge was hanging over. He almost felt bad, but he kept going. The next day, Luffy was gone. Ace went out without a problem. But the day after, Luffy came back without a scratch on her. She explained to the bandits how she could talk to animals, and they protected her from the meaner animals that lived in the forest. The bandits were surprised. So, when Ace left the next day, Luffy followed. Ace was sure he had lost Luffy. He met with his best friend, Sabo. They added the treasure they had gotten that day to their pirate fund. We're almost there. Sabo grinned. You can say that again. Ace cheered. One step closer to being pirates. When Ace said that, Luffy looked up. She noticed the two boys sitting to the tree. Luffy used her claws to scramble up into the tree. You guys want to be pirates? She asked. Ace and Sabo nearly fell out the tree. What are you doing here? Ace screamed at her. This is that girl you were talking about? Sabo asked. Ah, you told him about me. Luffy smiled at Ace. I told him how annoying you are. Ace glared. Then, the boys tackled Luffy to the ground. There was a large fight. At the end, Luffy was tied to a tree, and Ace and Sabo were covered in scratches and bite marks. You didn't tell me he was part fox, Sabo whined, blowing on the scratch on his arm. I thought she was faking it, Ace said, staring at her ears and tail. Why would you think that? Luffy wondered aloud. The boys ignored her. Well, what do we do with her? Sabo asked. Well, she might squeal about our treasure, we have to kill her, Ace said. Luffy's eyes widened. Yup, I guess so, Sabo said. Luffy tried to push farther back into the tree. Why do people keep trying to kill me? She screamed. Shut up and die like a pirate, Sabo hissed. Luffy started crying. No, 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 no. She whined loudly. I don't want to die. I want Shanks, she cried. Sabo glanced at Ace. She knows that awesome pirate Shanks? Sabo asked. Ace nodded. Luffy continued to cry. Some animals came to her. What's going on? Ace glared at Luffy. How dare you make her cry, that's what the animals say. Luffy translated the growl the boys got from a tiger cub. Ace and Sabo sighed. Yeah. I heard it coming from over here. Ace and Sabo looked and saw the pirates coming towards them. They boys jumped into a bush, leaving Luffy to converse with the animals. When the pirates got there, they looked at the animals, then at Luffy. Luffy wasn't the least bit scared. Even if the pirates looked mean. The animals growled in her defense. The pirates looked curiously at her. What are you? Someone asked. I ate the fox fruit, Luffy told them. They untied her from the tree and found she wasn't lying. She had her tail and ears out. The bandits smiled. Do you happen to know where a treasure is, little one? Luffy glanced up at the tree, then she turned away from them. No, I do not, she said, tail swishing. Bad lying gets you nowhere. The pirates growled, grabbing her by her shirt. Now be a good girl, fox thing, and tell us where the treasure is. The pirate yelled in her face. Let me go! Luffy scratched the pirate's face. That's it. The pirate glared and tucked Luffy under his arm. Forget the treasure. We'll sell this instead, he said, carrying Luffy away. Let go! Luffy cried as they carried her off into the forest. Ace and Sabo moved the treasure. Luffy was gone, but they didn't really mind. To them, she was just an annoying little girl. A girl who was now being sold. As the day went by, Sabo and Ace sat around to see if the pirates came back looking for their treasure. They were sure that Luffy had squealed and begged not to be sold. But to their confusion, the pirates never showed. You think they already came? Ace asked. No, I've been here all day, Sabo said. I was sure that girl would tell them for the sake of her freedom. Well, then what do you think happened? Ace yawned. They would have come back. Unless Sabo and Ace's eyes went wide. She never told. They boys yelled. Ace and Sabo ran to the junkyard where Sabo and the pirates lived. They felt obligated to save the girl, who, against her freedom, kept their secret a secret. They went to the hideout and peered through the window. Luffy was laying in a cage. She was battered and beaten. She wasn't moving, but she was alive. In pain, but alive. The boys noticed some spiked hammers and knives thrown around her cage. She was obviously tortured. They must have wanted her to tell about the treasure so they could make off with both her and their gold. By the way the captain paced angrily and how beaten Luffy was, Ace and Sabo could plainly see she kept her mouth shut. Ace and Sabo were sure Luffy wasn't going to be hurt anymore. Then, the pirate opened the cage, grabbing her by her long black hair and pulling her up to face him. Luffy opened her mouth in a silent scream and her face twisted with pain. Have you decided? Your life, for those brats' treasure. He spat. Luffy painfully looked at him and glared. No way. That treasure is for their dream, Luffy said. Then, the man slammed her back into the cage. Luffy coughed and reeled in pain. Then, her cage was closed. The pirate picked it up and threw the cage across the room. Luffy hit the bars and tumbled around as the cage hit the ground with a thud. I guess we'll sell you for all you're worth then, the pirate sneered. Ace and Sabo couldn't watch. They had been so mean to the girl who was giving her life for their sake. They couldn't take her being hurt. They had to protect her. The boys burst through the door, armed with long pipes. Get Luffy out of here, Ace yelled at Sabo, who nodded. Sabo ran over to the cage. Luffy opened her eyes and looked up at him. Hey, it's you, she breathed. Then she smiled. I hope your treasure's safe, she said before her eyes drooped closed. Sabo hit the side of the cage with his pipe, eventually forcing the door to swing open. He reached in and scooped up Luffy. She was in her regular human form, and surprisingly light. Sabo looked over to see Ace facing off with the captain. Ace, she called. You go ahead. I'll face him off. Sabo couldn't just leave Ace. He walked out and set Luffy on the ground. Stay here, he said. Then he ran back in and helped Ace beat the pirate. They grabbed Luffy afterward and escaped into the woods. They laid Luffy on a rock and treated her wounds, waiting till she woke up. Luffy yawned and looked at the two boys. Ace was staring at her angrily. Why'd you do that? You could have just told them where it was. You wouldn't be this hurt right now, Ace shouted. Luffy looked down. Ace, go easy on her, she did it for us. Right. Sabo looked at Luffy, tears were coming down her face. She nodded. I wanted you guys to know I wouldn't betray you. I wanted you to keep on saving to be pirates. Luffy sobbed. I wanted to be your friend. Luffy started crying. Ace's gaze softened. He sighed. Why would you want to be my friend? He asked. Because you're cool and strong, and then there's no one else. Luffy sniffled. So you're glad that I'm here? Ace asked. Luffy nodded. Of course. And it would be bad if I left? I'd be alone, Luffy admitted. Ace looked at Sabo. Sabo smiled at Luffy. Then I guess you can hang out with us, Ace said. Luffy smiled. Yeah, a lot of people will try to sell you, Sabo said, helping Luffy down from the rock. We can't have that, can we, Ace? Sabo asked. Ace looked to the side, then back at Sabo and Luffy, who were grinning like idiots. I guess not, he sighed. Over the next year, Luffy stayed close to Ace and Sabo. The boys would constantly have to fend off boys and men from trying to sell and or take advantage of Luffy. Luffy was fast and stronger than she appeared to be. She would beat the boys in fights sometimes. But most of the time, it was them who ended up winning because of their superior size and strength. It was one day, while looking for food, when the king of the forest attacked. Ace, Sabo and Luffy all fought, but in the end, it took some convincing from Luffy to fend off the tiger. The three got away. A bit later was when Ace smiled at them. Did you guys know that when pirates exchange sake cups, they become oath brothers? He said. He pulled out some sake and cups from his bag. I stole these from Dayton, I thought we could use them. Oath brothers? Luffy said sadly. And oath sister Luff, Ace said to her. The girl brightened up. Sabo laughed. The let's drink. He grinned. The three clanged their cups together, then, they each shared their cups. Luffy smiled when they finished. We're officially siblings, Ace stated. Yay! Ace Oni-chan. Sabo Oni-chan. Luffy smiled. The two felt proud at the name Oni-chan. Then they thought Sabo knew brothers were supposed to be kind to their little sister, and make sure they don't get hurt by anyone or thing. Ace, on the other hand, thought being an older brother meant beating down any boy who dared to approach his little sister with any type of impure intent. The brothers vowed to protect Luffy. And it was so. Ace stayed close to Luffy when they went into town or anywhere else. He would glare and threaten any boy or man who tried to take away his sister. But Ace was hard on her. He knew they would be separated one day and Luffy would have to deal with this all by herself. He went all out in fights and made her catch her own meals. When she came to him to ask for food or cried during fights, he would scold her. But on the opposite side was Sabo. He stayed close to Luffy too. He even moved into Dayton's. He was there for Luffy when she was tired and needed to be carried, or when she was hurt and needed medical aid. He was the go-to brother when Luffy wanted something and Ace said no. He spoiled Luffy, going easy on her when they fought and giving her food when she finished her own. The different attitudes always had the brothers at odds. Sabo thought Luffy needed to be treated with care, and tried to convince Ace to let her play with who she pleased. Ace thought Luffy needed to be tough so she could protect herself in the future. He knew from experience that most people were horrible, and would try to sell and take advantage of Luffy and her innocence. They were both right, in their own way, but they were wrong in each other's minds. It was 2 months before Ace, Sabo and Luffy moved out of Dayton's house. They built a pretend pirate ship in the woods up in the highest tree. They played all day once it was finished, but then, another problem arose. I can't wait to be captain. Luffy smiled. She looked forward to having her brothers as her crew. You, captain? Ace laughed. If anyone's captain, it's me. What make you captain? Sabo asked. Maybe I want to be captain. The three glared at each other. Then we make a bet. Captains have to strong, Ace said. And brave, Luffy added. Sabo nodded. Then, whoever beats Ace thought. The Forest King, Luffy blurted out. Perfect, Luff. Ace smiled. I guess that sounds fair. So we'll train on our own until then? Sabo asked. Ace looked nervously at Luffy, who nodded. I guess so. Ace sighed. So, the siblings set off. Ace and Sabo stayed close to the tree house, deciding to train together. Luffy, determined to win and train independently, went to a different part of the forest. Luffy got to a large part of the forest. After she set up her training targets and dummies, she let her transformation take over. Her ears popped out, as did her tail. Her eyes turned red and her hands and feet turned into paws. She bared her fangs. Now I can see what this devil's fruit can really do, she smiled. Luffy then set to work. She started practicing her punches and kicks first. She couldn't really punch, instead, she swiped the air. But she found that if she shot her claws out straight, they would shoot out like daggers. It was the same with her hand and feet. When she kicked, her dagger-like claws would shoot out as well. She could even make her teeth sharper if she wanted. Same with her claws. She tried making one claw as long as her arm. When she popped it off, she found she could use it like a sword. She smiled, then tried to practice her agility. She wondered exactly how fast she could run. For a test, she pushed her legs to the limit, jetting forward. She ran and ran and ran. Until she got tired, she dropped down on her hands and feet, finding her bones adjusting so she could stand this way. It felt better. She tried running again, getting much better results. Until someone shot an arrow at her. She just moved out of the way, but the sharp tip grazed her arm. She felt poison that was on the tip burn her arm. The pain was overbearing. She screamed and fell unconscious. Ace and Sabo were fighting. When they swore they heard their little sister scream in pain. The two ran as fast as they could. Luffy was often mistaken for an animal when she was in her full transformation. Hunters targeted her, and after they found out she was a little girl who just happened to be part fox, they tried to kidnap and sell her. Ace looked at Sabo as they ran. "I told you, she shouldn't go anywhere alone," Ace said, running faster. "Let's just hope she's okay," Sabo said. They both sped up, running deeper into the forest. The pirate who shot Luffy went over to her. "I can't believe I caught a fox. I'll eat good tonight," he cheered. Then, he got closer. His eyes widened when he was met with a young girl. "Shit! Hey kid! Wake up! Are you alright?" The man was confused. How did he mistake this girl for a fox? He moved her hat to the side, her face ablue and she wasn't breathing. He picked her up. That arrow had poison on it. She need medical attention. He rushed her back to his campsite. He laid her on a blanket in the sand and fed her the antidote. She laid still. He thought she was dead, before she coughed and took in a lot of deep breaths. He breathed out. But still, he wondered what a girl this small was doing in the forest, and how he had mistaken her for a fox in the first place. It was all very strange. When Ace and Sabo got to a point in the forest, they found an arrow lodged in a tree and Luffy's favorite hat on the ground. But no Luffy. No hunter. Ace started pacing, a soon-to-be habit. Sabo tried to think. But he couldn't with Ace moving back and forth like he was doing. They looked around and ran to the beach. If someone was trying to sell Luffy, that's where they'd go to dock and set off. They just hoped they weren't too late. Luffy was doing just fine. The man had wrapped, and tended to, her arm and it barely hurt anymore. She was eating with the man who had accidentally shot her. He watched her stuff her face with food. "I really am sorry, Luffy. I can't believe I mistook you for an animal," he sighed. Luffy shook her head. "No need to say sorry. I get that a lot. I'm just glad you won't try and sell me like those other hunters do." Luffy smiled. "Why would they do that?" the man asked. Luffy looked away. Ace told her not to show her transformation to anyone unless he or Sabo was nearby. "No reason," she lied. The man laughed. "You're a terrible liar, kid," he said. Luffy laughed along. "When?" "Luffy!" Ace burst from the forest and tackled the man to the ground. Sabo ran over to Luffy, who was sitting in confusion. Sabo looked at Luffy's bandaged arm while Ace stood up to the man. "Wait!" Luffy called, trying to get around Sabo. "Don't worry, Luff. We'll save you," Ace said as he charged the man and was thrown back. "Yeah. Stay behind us," Sabo said, getting ready to fight. The man stared at Ace and Sabo, then at Luffy. "Friends of yours?" he chuckled. Luffy smiled and nodded. "Yeah. These are my brothers." Luffy smiled. Ace and Sabo looked back at Luffy. Then they looked at each other. "So he wasn't trying to sell you?" Ace asked, standing straight and pointing at the man. Luffy shook her head. "And he wasn't trying to hurt you?" Sabo asked, again. Luffy shook her head. Ace and Sabo looked at each other, then collapsed into the sand, huffing and taking deep breaths. "Thank God," they breathed. The man turned out to be a pirate. He was defeated by Gold.D. Roger and his crew was disbanded. Ace and Sabo were very silent during the conversation. Luffy, on the other hand, smiled and clapped. "You really fought him? You really fought the Pirate King? That's so amazing! Was he as cool as Shanks said? Was he strong?" Luffy's eyes were shining and she was practically bouncing in her seat. "Well, all I can say was that he was a good man. He taught me that there are powerful people in the world." The pirate smirked. "What if Roger had a kid?" Ace asked. The man looked at him. Luffy was lost in her own world of pirates and admiration. "Well, that child would be called a demon. But he or she shouldn't be judged on his or her father's actions," the man said. Ace stood. "I'm going back to the house. Sabo, Can you make sure Luff gets home? He asked. Sabo nodded. You're going back, Ace Oni-chan? Luffy asked. Ace nodded and left. On the way home, Sabo looked to Luffy. Luchan, I think you should know. Ace is Gold.D, Roger's son, Sabo said. What? Really? Luffy smiled. I wonder what Roger was like. She was about to take off to talk to Ace when Sabo grabbed her arm. No! Luchan. Listen, Ace hates his father. Don't talk about him. Not around Ace. Do you understand? Luchan? Sabo said seriously. Luffy nodded. I won't say a word. She smiled. Then, the two went into the tree house. Sabo put on his best smile before entering. Oh, Ace. I thought you'd be asleep, Sabo said cheerfully. Oh, Ace Oni-chan. I didn't know the Pirate King was your dad, Luffy said with equal enthusiasm. Sabo almost fell over. Luchan, he hissed. Hey, Ace Oni-chan. What was Roger like? Do you know? Luffy smiled. Sabo could practically feel Ace getting angrier. Ace growled. Who told you that? He asked. Sabo Oni-chan. Luffy grinned. Ace turned and punched Sabo's head. Then, he did the same to Luffy. Ow! Sabo yelled. Why'd you hit me? Ace Oni-chan. Luffy wailed. There will be no talk of Gold.D, Roger in this house. Got it? Ace demanded. Luffy looked up angrily. So stingy. She stuck out her tongue. Ace hit her again. Sabo glared. She's right, Ace. We're siblings. You should be able to tell us anything, he yelled. Luffy agreed. Yeah, she shouted. Maybe I don't want to talk about it, Ace shouted back. Too bad. Ace's dad's the Pirate King. Ace's dad's the Pirate King, Sabo yelled, running from Ace. Gold.D, Roger. Gold.D, Roger. Luffy shouted along with Sabo. At the end of the fight, the house was ruined. Ace glared at the wall. His younger siblings and him were separated, sitting on different sides of the room with their backs turned. You guys aren't my old siblings anymore, Ace shouted. Same here, Sabo yelled. Ace and Sabo are jerks, Luffy muttered. Ace and Sabo felt a stab of pain. It was the first time, in a long time, Luffy didn't call them Oni-chan. Ace looked back. I didn't mean that, Luff. You know that, right? He said. Sabo turned too. Me too, we wouldn't leave you like that, Luchan, he said. Luffy turned around too, tears in her eyes. So you're still my brothers? She sniffled. Still your big brother. Ace and Sabo smiled. Luffy smiled back. The three laid out their beds, Luffy in the middle, and went to sleep. The three siblings called off the bet. But Luffy still decided to train with the pirate. Ace reluctantly approved and Sabo agreed, as long as she stayed with the pirate at all times. Luffy showed the man her transformation. The man smiled. So that's how I mistook you. What a strange girl you are. He smirked. Now I think we should work on your fighting, he said, and Luffy agreed. Meanwhile, Ace and Sabo trained. They got stronger and faster and better. After a month apart, they went to see Luffy. They approached the beach and heard a shout. The brothers looked to see Luffy fighting on par with the pirate. She jumped back and spun on her hand, spikes shooting from the paws on her feet. Then, she grew out one of her claws and used it as a sword. Luffy twirled the long, sword-like claw and fought with it like an expert. She had come a long way. She was faster and could call out parts of her transformation when she needed them. But they would appear so fast, and she never used more than two at one time. Ace and Sabo watched as their sister's teeth grew in defense to the sword the pirate had pulled. She blocked and countered by shooting her claw out. Ace and Sabo walked out onto the beach when the fight was over. Pretty good, Luff, Ace yelled. Luffy looked over and smiled. Yeah. Luchan, you looked great. Sabo smiled. Not as good as us. Ace smirked. We'll see. Luffy jumped back. The 7-year-old didn't bother to call out her full transformation like with all the other fights. She stood before Ace and Sabo. You're gonna fight both of us? Ace asked. Luffy nodded. Ace and Sabo looked at each other and shrugged. Ace and Sabo attacked her. Luffy ducked down on all fours and tripped them. The fight continued. Luffy was running circles around her older brothers. The pirate laughed and stopped the fight, patting Luffy on her hat-covered head. I could train you too as well, if these results are to your liking, the pirate offered, motioning to Luffy. The crybaby her brothers knew was replaced by the toughest girl they'd ever seen. Ace and Sabo looked at each other. Yeah, they said. Luffy smiled. She loved training with her brothers. She loved beating them in fights even more. The group trained for weeks. Until Ace and Sabo were back on top. It took some effort, but they could still take Luffy. She wasn't angry. She knew her brothers liked to be stronger than her. It was because she was younger, because she was a little girl. And it didn't matter, she would be stronger than them soon enough. They helped the pirate finish his ship. After another week, he set off for sea. Ace, Sabo, and Luffy declined the offer to join him, all stating that they wanted their own crew. And just like that, their teacher was gone. It was a few days later the team decided to go to town. Sabo told them about something called ramen. Luffy wanted to try some. So they went. Ace stood on Luffy's shoulders. Luffy stood on Sabo's. Together, they looked like one adult. Sabo handed up a card. Luffy held it out. And they got inside the noble's place. Once they were sure no one was watching, they hopped down. Luffy was happy she got to see the inside of that giant wall. Sabo led them to the restaurant. Luffy looked around. All the girls were wearing fancy dresses. They looked silly. The boys had on suits. They would smile and wave at her. She would wave back before being pulled along by Ace. They got to the restaurant, and Sabo showed the card again, able to get in. They had a private room in the back. Wow! This is so cool! Luffy smiled. Then, they brought in ramen. 3 bowls. Luffy sucked it down. So did Ace. Sabo smiled and started his. HAA. This is good, Ace said, mouth full. Luffy nodded. She swirled some noodles on her claw and popped it in her mouth. They had more and more and more. Until they had to leave. And they couldn't pay. Sabo picked Luffy up on his back. What's going on? She asked as Ace opened the 3rd-story window. Luff, you really think we have the money to pay for all this food? This is what's called a dine and dash. Ace explained. Him and Sabo hopped out the window and walked away. Suddenly, the cops were on their heels. The 3 ran. Split up! Sabo yelled. Ace hopped up to a roof. Luffy turned and ran down an alley. Sabo kept straight. Luffy ran and ran. Until she was sure she wasn't being followed. She let her tail out and laid on it. Then, a shadow came over her. She looked up and her brown eyes met with green ones. It was a boy, about Ace's age. He had brown hair. Who might you be, miss? The boy asked, helping her up. Luffy was taken back by his politeness. I'm Monkey.D, Luffy. Luffy said, not a hint of politeness in her voice. The boy smiled. Hello, Luffy. Nice you meet you. I'm Akira. I belong to a noble family, he said proudly. Luffy smiled. That nice. Now I need to find my brothers, Luffy said, turning and walking away. Akira followed. Don't you want to come over and play with me? He said. Not really. Luffy smiled again. Akira pouted. He grabbed her hand. I'll help you find your brothers. You have to play with me first, though, he told her. Luffy looked around and shrugged. I guess it could be fun. Let's go. So, Luffy and Akira walked down the streets hand in hand to his house. Ace met up with Sabo. It was the 3rd time they split up in hopes of finding Luffy in the big city. It was a bad idea to split up. She should have stayed with one of us, Ace said, looking around with his brother. Sabo sighed. She can take care of herself, but I'm still worried, he said. They were walking by, when they heard Luffy laughing. Akira's mom fawned over Luffy. She gave the 7-year-old dress of hers, since Luffy's clothes were too boyish for her. After Luffy refused to have her hair brushed by Akira's mom, she went to play outside. You are mom's weird. Luffy laughed. I guess she is. Then, Akira leaned forward beside her, tapping Luffy's stomach. Tag. He smirked. No fair. I wasn't ready. Luffy ran after him. Akira and Luffy ran around playing tag. It was fun. Luffy enjoyed hanging out with Akira. Then Ace and Sabo were at the fence. "Luff?" Ace said. He saw his sister. She was in a bright red dress. Ace couldn't believe that that was his sister, the same girl who fought a pirate, who had fought an ape, who could jump off a cliff and live, who beat him and Sabo up that one time. "Yo! Ace Oni-chan! Sabo Oni-chan!" Luffy waved. It was the only way they could tell it was really her. Akira walked over to Luffy. "Who are they, Luffy-chan?" Akira asked. "Luffy-chan?" Ace repeated with disgust. He was about ready to rip the kid's head off. The only person who Ace let add Chan to the end of Luffy's name was Sabo, and the blue-hatted boy didn't look too happy either. Luffy ran over and climbed over the fence. She smiled at her brothers. "That guy's Akira-kun. He's my new friend." Luffy smiled. Akira leaned over the fence. "You'll came back tomorrow, right, Luffy-chan?" Akira asked. Luffy shrugged. "I don't know," she said. Akira reached in his pocket and pulled out a necklace with his family crest on it. "Here. Take this. Then you can come over whenever you want," Akira said. Luffy caught it and shoved it in her pocket. "K. Maybe I'll come over again. Later, Akira-kun." Luffy smiled, running off back home with her brothers. It was on the way back that a man looked over at them from the street. "Sabo?" he said. The siblings looked over. "Sabo Oni-chan. I think that guy's calling you." Luffy pointed. Sabo looked over. His eye went wide. He grabbed Luffy's hand. "It's no one," he said, running faster. "Then how does he know your name?" Ace asked. "Can we just run?" Sabo said, pulling Luffy faster. They ran and the man yelled again. "Sabo!" But the kids were gone. The siblings were sitting at the cliff near the water. Ace and Luffy sat near the tree. Sabo was a little bit away from them. "Why won't Sabo Oni-chan talk?" Luffy asked Ace. "I don't know, Luff, but I'm gonna find out." Ace walked over to Sabo. "Yo. Who was that guy?" Ace asked. Sabo looked up and shook his head. "Sabo Oni-chan. You said we shouldn't have secrets," Luffy yelled, running over to them. Sabo sighed. "Okay, I'm not an orphan like you guys. That was my father. I'm sorry I lied," Sabo said, expecting his brother and sister to yell at him, but all was silent. When he looked up, they shrugged. "So what?" they said. "Sabo Oni-chan is still Sabo Oni-chan," Luffy said with boredom. Ace nodded. "Well put." Sabo smiled at ID brother and sister. He pulled Luffy down and hugged her. Ace made a throw-up sound. Then, the two tackled him in hug. The next day Luffy left early. Ace woke up and yawned. He put his hand down, expecting Luffy's arm to be under his hand, but it wasn't there. Ace looked around. Luffy wasn't there. He threw a pillow at Sabo. "Where's Luff?" he yelled. Sabo woke up and stretched. There was a note on his forehead. Ace ripped it off and read. "Akira came over. He wanted to go play in Fuchsia Village. I'll try to be back as soon as I'm done playing." Ace crushed the note in his hand. "What's up?" Sabo asked. "Is Luchan alright?" Ace threw the note on the floor and started getting dressed. "So that little brat thinks he can come when I'm not awake," he muttered, shoving on his shoes. "Sabo, we're going to Fuchsia Village," Ace said, pulling his brother up. Sabo read the note. "Shouldn't Luffy be able to play with who she wants?" Sabo asked. Ace shook his head. "I don't trust him," Ace said. "You don't trust any boy," Sabo sighed. "Not true. I trust you, and I trust me," Ace said. "What a big step," Sabo said sarcastically. "Hey, we're all Luff needs," Ace said as Sabo followed him out the door. Ace and Sabo watched over Luffy from a tree. She was playing at the park, showing off her cartwheels and fighting moves. Akira tried to fight her, but Luffy flipped him over and he landed with a thud. Ace chuckled. Then the boy got up and smiled. "Fine. You can beat me now. But when I'm a marine I'll be 10 times stronger than you." Smirked. Then, the unexpected happened. Garp showed up. "Luffy. So we're here. Dayton said you had moved out with Ace and some other boy. Luffy smiled and nodded. Sabo Oni-chan and Ace Oni-chan. Luffy smiled. Oni-chan? Garp laughed. Well, that great, who's this? He asked, looking at Akira. Akira was in awe. You're Garp, the Marine Vice Admiral. Akira smiled. It's an honor to meet you. I hope to be a great Marine like you someday. Akira bowed. Luffy rolled her eyes. Garp picked up Luffy and laughed. You see, Luffy, this is why you need to be a Marine. You'll get the respect you deserve, he told her. But Grandpa, I want to be a pirate, Luffy whined. Garp held Luffy upside down. No granddaughter of mine is going to be a pirate. You there, boy. He looked at Akira. You need to slam every inch of your marine spirit into her. He let Luffy down, then left. There was an awkward silence between Luffy and Akira. You want to be a marine? Luffy said in disgust. You want to be a pirate? Akira said, with equal disgust. They glared at each other for a moment. I hate marines, Luffy said. Akira looked hurt. Well, I hate pirates. But he shifted his feet. Luffy glanced at him, then looked away. But I think you're really pretty and nice, Akira said, face red. Ace almost strangled the boy, but Sabo held him back. Luffy looked up at him. I think you're cool and fun. Luffy smiled at him. Even if you want to be a marine, I guess we can be friends. Luffy smiled. Akira blushed harder. Can you be my girlfriend? Akira asked. Again, Sabo had to hold Ace back, covering his mouth. UFFY, Ace yelled, trying to break away from Sabo. Luffy looked at Akira. I thought I was already. I am a girl, and I am your friend. What part about that didn't you get? Luffy said. Akira smiled. Then, he looked at the time. Oh, I have to go. He kissed Luffy's cheek. Luffy rubbed her face. Why'd you do that? She asked. Because I always see boys doing that to their girlfriends, he said. Luffy thought about it for a moment, and kissed Akira's cheek. Ace had passed out by now. Akira's face heated up again. You sick? Luffy asked. And no. See you tomorrow, Luffy-chan. And Akira was gone. Luffy walked home as usual. When Ace and Sabo hopped from the trees, Sabo kept his cool and smiled at Luffy. Ace on the other hand grabbed Luffy and dragged her home. Once they were home, Ace set Luffy straight. Listen, Luff. Ace started. Luffy was sitting next to Sabo, looking quiet, confused. Do you even know what a girlfriend is? Ace asked. Yes, I do. Luffy nodded. Since I'm a girl, and I'm Akira's friend, I'm his girlfriend, Luffy said. Ace was still fuming. That's not all there is to it, Luff. He paced the floor. Luffy noticed Ace did that a lot. What more can there be? Luffy asked. Sabo chuckled and looked at Ace. Yeah, Ace, care to explain? He laughed. Ace's face heated up. He himself had never been in a relationship, but he knew enough to know he didn't want Luffy in one. Not with that marine boy. Well, it means that Ace couldn't find the words. They were lost in his embarrassment. So, he kept his mouth shut. Just make sure I'm around when you play, he muttered. Then the three went to the great terminal. They needed wood and string. Luffy wanted a swing. They were faced with the pirates again, the ones who had tried to sell Luffy so long ago. Luffy was honestly scared. But she stood bravely, she was stronger now. But the pirates fixed their gaze on Sabo. When they moved out of the way, the man from days before came from behind them, eyes locking with Sabo's. Sabo, the man said. Father, Sabo said coldly. Are you done playing pirate? Are you all right? Did these children force you to do those evil things? His father said plainly. Ace and Sabo looked at him with disgust. We did no such thing, Ace said in defense of him and his sister. I'm sure, Sabo's father said coldly. But Sabo Oni-chan wanted to be with us. Right, Sabo Oni-chan? Luffy asked. Sabo's father looked at Luffy, then at the pirates. This is that fox hybrid you were talking about. She looks like a normal girl. Why would I buy such a petty child? Sabo's father said. Ace was angry. This man practically called his adorable little sister trash. Ace went to attack when Luffy wailed in pain. Luff. Ace went to her aid, seeing she had a large cut in her leg. But Ace was held down. The pirates continued to yell at Luffy. Why don't you transform? A pirate laughed. Scratch us with your claws? Another said. Bite us with your fangs? Someone added. Cushion our blows with your tail and fur? Hear us coming before we do with those ears of yours? Come at us, little monster! The pirates taunted. Luffy looked down. She hated being teased, especially about being a monster. She didn't hold back. Luchan don't! Sabo yelled back at her. But Luffy was transformed. She growled and with lightning speed, scratched the pirates. Ace tried to yell for her to stop, but his mouth was covered. Luffy went to attack the leader, who moved, causing Luffy to launch herself into a cage. A cage that Ace somehow knew was made of that sea-like substance. Luffy turned and the cage door closed and locked. Are you satisfied? Will you buy her now? The pirate leader asked. I will. She will make a nice pet for Sabo and his new brother. Sabo's father smirked at the pet who was losing consciousness thanks to the special cage he ordered. Sabo stood in front of the cage. No! Please! Let her go! He begged his father. His father raised an eyebrow. Why should I? He asked. Because. I'll do what you say. I'll come home if you promise not to harm either of them. They're my dear siblings, Sabo said. Ace's yell was muffled. Luffy looked up, the cage door opened and she was pulled out. But Sabo was walking away with his dad. She didn't understand. She looked over and Ace was just standing there. Why wasn't he doing anything? Luffy called out. Sabo Oniai-chan, where are you going? I thought you'd stay with us. She yelled. Sabo felt a stab of pain. He turned and looked at Luffy. She was sad. Luchan, I'm afraid I can't be your brother anymore, he said. Luffy was in shock. But you said you wouldn't leave me. Luffy began to cry. Sabo wasn't her brother anymore. Ace held back his own tears as his best friend, and his only brother, went through the large doors of the wall, never to come back out. It was breaking Ace's heart. Luffy just wouldn't stop crying over Sabo. You'd think he had died. They sat in the pirates' hideout. Ace had agreed to do some work for them, in exchange that they'd quit trying to sell his sister. So Ace and Luffy were carrying boxes and putting them in random places around the terminal. Luffy was still sad. She hadn't spoken for the last couple of days. After their work was done, the two went home. It was just Ace and Luffy. Ace wondered how he could pick up Sabo's place. He'd have to be both of them now. A walking conflict. A caring hardass. It was late when Luffy rolled over and faced Ace. Sabo's coming back, right? She asked. Since Sabo said he couldn't be her brother, she couldn't call him Oniai-chan anymore. Ace shrugged. He really didn't know what to say. Luffy let out a sad sigh. I really miss him, she muttered before falling asleep. Yeah, Ace said, reaching up to hang her head up. I know, I do too. Ace decided. Tomorrow he would let Luffy play with Akira. He would go and get Sabo back. No matter what. He hated to admit it. But when Luffy was sad, it poked at a soft spot in his personality. The next day, Akira didn't come. Ace heard the Goa Kingdom was on lockdown. So, he had no choice but to try and ditch Luffy. But, being the clingy girl she was, Luffy followed. They were in the Great Terminal when they met up with the pirates again. Ace was pretty sure they wouldn't honor their promise, and he couldn't have been more right. Once again, then caged Luffy. You promised, Ace yelled. The pirates laughed. We did we? Well, change of plans. The pirates started walking off with Luffy. Give Luff back, Ace attacked. The pirates glared. Do you really want to take her back? It's more dangerous here than anywhere else, the captain yelled. What? What are you talking about? I'm talking about how the nobles are going to set this place on fire. What? Why? It's the celestial dragons. They're coming and the nobles want the trash gone. So those crates. Yep, each full of gunpowder. Now if you'll excuse us, we have business inside the wall. They started off with Luffy again. Ace ran after them, but heard an explosion. The Great Terminal was starting to catch fire. Ace and the pirates ran for the large gate. But it was locked. "Hey! Let us in! We have the fox child!" The pirate yelled, but no answer. They didn't keep their promise either. Ace smirked. The pirates slammed Luffy's cage on the ground. It broke and Ace helped her out. Damn it, the pirate started off back to his ship. Ace looked at his sister. "Let's get out of here, Luff," he yelled. "Yeah." Luffy smiled and ran behind him. The fire was fierce. Luffy coughed. "Luff, we just gotta go a bit farther." Ace coughed, arm over his mouth. A large shadow stood over Luffy. She turned and saw Captain Blue Jam. "Ace." She ran a bit faster, but was caught by her shirt collar. Ace turned around. "Luffy!" he yelled. Blue Jam laughed. His pirate crew surrounded them. "I almost forgot this," he chuckled. Ace grabbed a piece of wood and swung. "Let her go." Ace coughed. The pirate was hit in his side. He let Luffy go with a grunt of pain. Luffy scrambled up and ran to her brother. "Stay behind me," Ace said. Luffy backed up some, fending off the other pirates as Ace started fighting Blue Jam. Her brother was being beaten. Blue Jam had drawn a sword and swung, cutting Ace's arm. Luffy jumped in. "Don't!" she yelled, blocking the sword with her claws when he swung at Ace again. The pirates swung at her. Luffy moved and clawed his face. "You damned brat!" the pirate yelled. He pushed Luffy down. Then, he held his sword to her face. "Luffy!" Ace yelled, running past the pirates at her. "This is what happens when you get Blue Jam angry." The pirate smirked. "Don't you dare!" Ace shouted, only to be punched. Ace got up again and watched Blue Jam raise his sword, aiming for Luffy's face. "Stop!" Ace shouted, but the pirate swung down. "Don't you dare!" Ace shouted with all his might. He felt a wave of energy leave him. Suddenly, all the pirates fainted. Blue Jam even staggered back. "What the hell?" he said, shaking as he let Luffy go. Luffy got up and ran to Ace. Blue Jam regained his composure and glared at the two kids. He spun his sword. "Damn brats," he muttered. Then he swung at Ace, who was still a bit hazy about what he just did. "Ace Oni-chan!" Luffy pushed him down, earning a slash on his back. Luffy screamed and fainted from the pain. "Luffy!" Ace yelled. Blue Jam turned to Ace. Then, he was punched dead in the face. Ace didn't know what was going on. "Luffy? Luffy!" Ace turned and saw two of Dayton's bandits trying to wake up Luffy. Dayton was in front of him, facing off with Blue Jam. Ace got up to help. "Ace, get out of here," Dayton said. Then she turned. "How's Luffy?" "She'll be fine." "Ace, let's go," the bandits shouted. "No, I'm not running," Ace yelled. "Suit yourself," Dayton said. Luffy hazily looked over the bandit's shoulder as she was carried back towards the forest. "Ace?" she muttered. Then she blacked out again. Luffy woke up the next day. "Ace Oni-chan!" she shouted. But when she looked around, she only saw Dayton's bandits. "Where's Ace Oni-chan?" Luffy asked. One bandit shook his head. "Luffy, he and Dayton haven't come back yet," he said. "What? Why?" We don't know." Luffy tried to stand, but her back stung. "Are they okay? Is Ace Oni-chan okay?" Luffy asked. "We don't know that either. They could be dead for all we know," another bandit said. "Don't say that," the bandits yelled at him. "Ace Oni-chan? Dead?" Luffy whimpered. Then she started crying. "Oh, Luffy!" The bandit tried to calm her down. "Ace Oni-chan!" Luffy wailed. Luffy was better after a week, but Ace and Dayton were still missing. Luffy ran to the great terminal. It was completely empty and burned down. "Dayton! Ace Oni-chan!" she shouted. She looked around. She ran towards the beach. "Not here either." She sighed. She refused to think her brother and Dayton were dead. They were too strong for that. Luffy sat and looked out to the ocean. She felt like her world was crumbling. She was supposed to go out to sea with her brothers. She could almost see Sabo sailing out on the ocean. "Wait! That is Sabo!" Luffy ran a bit closer to the water. "Sabo!" she shouted. he was sailing out past a large ship. Sabo. She waved and yelled louder. It's me. Luffy. I guess he can't hear me. Luffy watched. But then, a cannonball hit the side of Sabo's ship. Sabo was okay, but Luffy panicked. Sabo. Hey. Sabo. She screamed. Then a second cannonball hit, and Sabo and his ship was submerged underwater. Luffy backed up some, falling into the sand. Oh my god, Sabo, she muttered. She got on all fours, turned, and ran for the forest. She herself couldn't swim, but she could get someone who could. She saw someone sneaking out of the gate and to the forest. She ran to them. As she got closer, she saw who it was. Akira-kun! Akira-kun! Akira stopped. Oh. Luffy-chan. I just was going to see you. The town is so busy today, so I snuck out. He smiled. HM? What's wrong, Luffy-chan? Luffy grabbed his hand. You can swim, right? I'm the best swimmer out of all the noble kids, Akira said proudly. Follow me. Sabo. You have to save him. Luffy pulled him along. Akira didn't understand, but followed Luffy. In seconds they were back at the beach. The ship was at the dock now. Luffy pointed at the ship wreckage. He's there, Luffy said. She saw Sabo laying limp and burned on a piece of wood. Akira stuck up a thumb. Leave it to me. Anything for Luffy-chan. Akira kicked off his shoes. Luffy jumped on his back and he ran into the water and swam out when it got deeper. Akira managed to get to Sabo with Luffy on his back. Luffy pulled Sabo back to shore. They brought Sabo out the water. Sabo. Sabo? Hey! Wake up. Luffy shook her brother. Sabo coughed up some water. Akira huffed in the sand. Thanks, Akira-kun. You're the best boyfriend ever. Luffy hugged her friend. Akira blushed. I should go. You need to get Sabo out of here, right? He said. Luffy pulled away and nodded. Yeah. She picked up Sabo on her back. Later, Akira-kun. Ace and carried an injured Daiden back to the house. He had saved her from death, and they laid low until she was better. Ace was praised and thanked, but he was bothered by something. Where's Luff? He asked. Oh. Luffy went to look for you guys, someone said. By herself. Ace shouted, then winced in pain. It's fine. Daiden yawned. If she's the brat I know she is, she'll handle herself. Then, Luffy came bursting through the door. She was wet and dirty. Sabo was unconscious and injured on her back. Sabo. Ace hobbled over. He was shot by a cannon. He tried to go out to sea on his own. Luffy huffed. He's hurt, Luffy said. Bring him here. Daiden called. She had gotten up from the mat she was on. Daiden did consider the troublesome three as her kids anyway. Luffy laid Sabo on the mat, and the bandits started treating his wounds. Luffy turned and faced Ace. You were alive, I knew it. She jumped on him. Ace fell over and winced in pain. Oh, of course I'm alive. Don't kill me off like that, Ace shouted. I miss you. Luffy smiled. Ace looked away. Yeah, me too, he muttered. After a week, Sabo woke up. He and Ace had a small fight, but got over it. Luffy began calling him Oni-chan again. All was well. After a month, Sabo was better. The three moved back into their tree house. Akira started coming over every once in a while again. When Akira turned 15, he left to be a marine. A 13-year-old Luffy was left pouting and missing her friend. The three were older now. Ace was much taller, the freckles on his face a bit more noticeable. His hair grew a bit longer, and his face was thinner. His muscles were more pronounced. He got ASL tattooed on his arm, and he was much stronger, and just as, if not more, protective of Luffy. Ace was 17 years old now, outfits consisting of orange shorts, and whatever shirt her could find, if he decided to wear one that day. He would often get the attention of girls in the village and Goa Kingdom when he went for food and supplies. He wouldn't notice, too busy glaring at men drooling over Luffy. Sabo was also 17. His blonde hair grew longer. He was a bit leaner than Ace but about the same height. Sabo's face had an X scar on his cheek from the boat accident. He was protective of Luffy, but didn't show it. No need to look crazy like some brothers, Ace. Sabo wore his trademark blue shorts, white shirt and blue jacket. The girls in Luffy's village would fawn over him and giggle when he noticed, smiled and waved. Luffy was 15. Her chest started filling out, causing a large money drop on new shirts. The buttons just wouldn't close on her vests. Her monthly friends started coming around and she tortured and terrified her brothers during it. She refused to wear bras for a short time, claiming it was restraining and she didn't need them. It took a week of convincing from Sabo and Makino to break her down. To Ace's despair, Luffy had a perfect hourglass figure, long dark hair, and a generously large chest. Her usual outfit was her red vest that came down to her belly button, some blue shorts, that Ace insisted weren't long enough, her straw hat and sandals. It was time for Ace and Sabo to leave. Luffy saw them off at the pier. "So we'll be seeing you, Luff." Ace smiled, hugging his sister before hopping on his boat. Sabo smiled, hugging her next. "Good luck, Luchan." He smiled. "Yeah. I'll be the best pirate ever." Luffy waved as they sailed off. "I won't miss those little brats one bit." Dayton sobbed from behind everyone. Luffy laughed. The boats were a little ways off now. "See you later. Ace Oni-chan. Sabo Oni-chan." Luffy waved. Sabo smiled and waved. "See you soon, Luchan," he called. "Later, Luff." Ace smiled. Soon Luffy would go off on her own. She would probably be even more gorgeous in the next 2 years. She would still be the same, innocent Luffy all alone, no one to protect her, maybe even have some men on her crew fall in love. "Wait, what?" "Luffy!" Ace yelled, about to jump, rocking the connected boats. "Whoa! Ace!" Sabo staggered on his boat. "Turn the boat around, Sabo." "I'm going back!" Ace yelled. "What?" "No, Ace. I know what you're doing. Luffy will be fine." "Luffy! Get on this boat now. If I can't go back, you're coming with me," Ace shouted. Sabo jumped over and covered his mouth. "Honestly, Ace, Luffy's gonna be fine." The boat rocked and water splashed as the fight between Ace and Sabo raged. "Let go! Damn it, Sabo!" "Ace, we're too far out to turn back now. You're gonna capsize us." "Luffy! Shut up!" Luffy stood watching the panic going on at sea. Ace and Sabo were arguing about something. "Luffy!" She heard Ace scream, but she didn't hear the rest. She shrugged and waved. "Love you guys too," she yelled, assuming that's what was said. Then she stretched. "All right. Time to train." She smiled, running off. "I'll train hard. I have 2 years." She beamed. And Luffy trained nonstop. Her grandfather even visited her once. "Luffy, is that you?" Garp's jaw dropped at the sight of his granddaughter. "Yo, Grandpa. Of course it's me." Luffy waved. But you're in your dash." Garp paused, not able to find words. Luffy laughed. "I do look different from when you last saw me. I got taller." Luffy smiled. "That's not what I meant," Garp sighed. "You're so strange." Luffy sighed. Long story short, Garp was gone the next day. 2 years later, Luffy was standing on a boat with the whole town waving her goodbye. Luffy smiled. "I'll be the Pirate King before you know it." She yelled. Everyone cheered. The mayor sighed. "Luffy, why do I think you're the reason we're going to be so infamous?" he said. Luffy laughed and waved. Even the sea monster saw her off, giving her boat a little push. "Whoa! Thanks." She smiled. "Make us proud, Luffy-chan," the monster growled happily. "I will." Luffy smiled, letting her boat drift, and the island faded from view. Her adventure finally starts. And it'll be a damn good one. Luffy smiled. A terrible storm at sea one night. Luffy screamed as the boat was mercilessly rocked from side to side. She held on tight but found herself coming to a whirlpool. The boat spun and began to break into pieces. She looked around, no one to save her. She jumped into a barrel, using her tail to cushion herself. She felt the barrel tossed around, then it stopped. Luffy didn't bother to come out, she was so comfy with her tail. She yawned and drifted off to sleep. Luffy woke up, she was still in the barrel. She decided, ocean or not, she had to swim out at some point. Luffy stood and burst open the cage, stretching her tense muscles. She yawned and smiled. She was right, this was better. What a nice nap. She grinned. She looked down and saw a boy staring at her from his place on the ground. Hi. I'm Luffy. Luffy smiled. The boy inched away. Pee-pee pirate. He yelled. Luffy jumped him, covering his mouth and bringing a finger to her lips. Shut up. Idiot. She let Kobe stand scream again and I'll kill you, got it? Kobe nodded. Luffy smiled. Good. Now. Where are we? Kobe started stuttering. This is a marine ship, El Luffy-san. Kobe muttered. Luffy nodded. I see. Are you a marine? Luffy asked. Kobe shook his head. No. But I want to be. I'll be a marine and I'll capture the pirate who enslaved me. Kobe vowed a bit loudly. Why are you enslaved? Luffy asked. Well, Kobe sighed. Kobe told Luffy his story. Luffy laughed. Oh wow. She giggled. You're so stupid, Kobe. She laughed. Kobe blushed. Well, when I get strong. That ugly Alvida won't stand a chance. Kobe yelled. But then a yell came from behind. What was that, Kobe? Luffy looked up to see the ugliest woman she's ever seen. Alvida glared at Kobe. Kobe! Who is the most beautiful person on the sea? Alvida yelled. Kobe flinched. That would be. He paused. That would be. He stood tall and glared. That would be Luffy. Kobe blurted out. Luffy looked around. What? Me? Luffy asked. Alvida glared at Luffy. Not for long, she yelled, swinging her club at the girl. Kitsun pistol, Luffy yelled, shooting out her claws. Alvida yelped in pain. Kitsun whip. Luffy used her tail to knock Alvida off the ship. Kobe stared at Luffy in awe. What was that? He yelled. Then he noticed Luffy had ears and a tail. What the hell are you? He yelled. Luffy smiled. I ate the kitsun fruit. Luffy smiled. A/N. I'll use the Japanese word for fox, it sounds cooler, tongue sticking out. Luffy told Kobe that he owed her. So, Kobe took his boat and sailed to the nearest island. And I can keep your boat, right? Luffy smiled. Yes, Luffy-san. Kobe said respectfully. Thanks. Now, where are we, Kobe? Luffy started walking. Kobe scrambled behind her as they entered town. I think this is Shell's town. It's home of a marine base run by Axe-Hand Morgan. They recently captured a pirate hunter, Roronoa Zoro. Kobe informed her. Luffy looked at Kobe. Who? Roronoa Zoro. The infamous pirate hunter, and he is said to be one of the best swordsmen. A demon even, Kobe informed her with a shiver. A sharp-toothed smile spread across Luffy's face. A demon, huh? She jumped with excitement. Now I really want him. I want Zoro on my pirate crew. Luffy cheered. Kobe's eyes widened and he started shaking. El Luffy-san! That's impossible. Impossible! Kobe yelled. Luffy grabbed his arm and flung him ahead of her. Bring me there. To the marine base. Luffy laughed. Kobe sighed. He had no choice. He stood and led Luffy through the town. Luffy and Kobe sat on the gate. Look, Luffy-san. Don't get mad, but I really don't think he's going to be out in the open, Kobe said. Luffy looked around. What do you mean? She asked. Isn't that him right there? She pointed at a man tied to a cross. Kobe squinted for a better view. And no. It can't be. Green bandana and a stomach warmer, a green shirt, black pants, green hair. It's him. It's Roronoa Zoro! Kobe screamed, then a ladder hit the gate on the side of Kobe. A little girl climbed up and over, running over to Zoro. Wait. Don't, little girl, Kobe yelled. But Luffy covered his mouth. Shush. You're going to bring attention to us. If it gets out of hand, I'll step in, Luffy hissed. Then she watched. Zoro had noticed those two on the fence. One was ridiculously loud, the other sat and observed him. What were they planning? Before he could call over to them, the little girl he had saved days earlier stood in front of him. She was holding a rice ball. Get lost, he told her. But I brought this for you, the girl said, handing him the ball. Well, he's not supposed to be eating. You should be killed on the spot for helping him. a voice said. The girl and Zoro turned to see Morgan's son, Helemepo. I was just the girl was interrupted. You were just helping this criminal. Helemepo snatched the rice ball from the girl's hand and bit into it. He spit it out and threw it on the ground. This is disgusting anyway. You need salt. Not sugar. The little girl had tears in her eyes. But I thought it would taste bittersweet, she muttered. Well, you guess wrong. He stomped on it. Throw her out of here, Helemepo ordered. Luffy watched as they literally threw the little girl out. She jumped up and caught her. Kobe slid down. Luffy-san, are you alright? Kobe asked. Luffy sat up. Yeah, I'm fine. Luffy smiled. Her tail had broken her fall. The little girl looked at her. Are you here to save him? She asked. Luffy nodded. Sure am. Don't worry, go on, go home, Luffy told the girl. And the girl nodded and ran off. Luffy smiled at Kobe now. Let's get over the fence. Kobe shook his head. No way. We'll get caught. Luffy-san. But she was already clawing her way back up. Zoro glanced up. Those two were there again. But this time, the more realized person had pointy ears atop their head and what looked like a tail. Zoro had to be hallucinating. There was no way this was real. But then, the animal like one hopped the gate, landing on all fours. The other stumbled over and fell next to it. The animal one stood tall and started over to Zoro. The other one took hesitant steps. They finally came into view. And Zoro realized he wasn't going crazy. In front of Zoro stood a girl. She had long dark hair, a red vest, blue shorts, long legs, tan skin, a wide smile, brown eyes, a large chest, a straw hat, and fox ears and a tail. A boy was hiding behind her. He was round-looking, a sailor suit, glasses and pink hair. The girl looked at Zoro. Hi. She smiled. Zoro looked at her. She wasn't very tall. In fact, he was face to face with her now. He looked to the side. Hey. He yawned. What do you want? He asked. Luffy smiled. I'm here to set you free. You'll come with me and join my pirate crew. Luffy smirked. Zoro stared at her in bewilderment. HAA? Set me free? How do you plan to do that? Zoro chuckled. He assumed the ears and tail were part of some costume by this time. Luffy smiled. Like this. She grew out her claws and sliced. Zoro flinched. Then he fell forward. The ropes were off. He looked up at Luffy. Swords? He smirked. Luffy shook her head. Claws. But they're just as powerful. She grinned, letting them grow. You're a very interesting girl. Zoro sat back. Luffy laughed. Sure am. Now, let's get you out of here. She smirked. Luffy started walking away. Zoro didn't follow. HM? Zoro? Let's go. She walked back. Sorry to say, I'm a bit weak right now, and I'm not leaving my treasured swords. Zoro yawned. Luffy smiled. Oh, is that all? If you wanted your swords, all you had to do was ask. Luffy stood on all fours, tail swishing. What are you doing? Zoro asked, staring at her curiously. I run faster this way. She smiled, then she bounded off to the marine base. Kobe was standing nervously a little ways from Zoro. He had to admit, he felt a little bit jealous. He might as well have been the center of Luffy's attention now. She wanted to hang around this demon guy. What was so great about him? He was thinking when Luffy came bounding back, one sword in her mouth, one bring gripped by her tail, and the tied onto her back. Marines were chasing her. She jumped from side to side, dodging bullets. Zoro struggled to stand. This girl was apparently his new captain. If so, did that mean he had to help and protect her? Fight alongside her? Make sure she was happy and never alone? So be it then. Luffy ran by and he swiftly grabbed his swords from her. She skidded behind him and jumped to his side. You can move? She asked. I've been worse. Zoro shrugged. Luffy smiled. Her claws became longer and she sliced the ground as she got into a fighting position. Right. 6-sword style. She smiled. So you are a swordsman? Zoro placed his third sword in his mouth. Nope, this is just another way to use my devil's fruit. Luffy smiled. Is that so? Zoro smirked before they charged the Marines together. Morgan wasn't hard to beat with Luffy and Zoro's combined skills. Luffy half-carried the exhausted Zoro to a restaurant. She sat next to Kobe and Zoro sat across from her. So how many people on this crew? Zoro asked, after he had eaten his fill. Luffy swallowed and sighed in happiness. HM? Oh, no one else. You're my first mate, Zoro. Luffy smiled. Zoro sat up. So wait, he pointed at himself. It's just me, then pointed at Luffy. And you? He asked. Luffy nodded, using her fangs to rip apart a piece of meat. That's right. She forced out past the food. Well, this is going to be an awkward journey, Zoro muttered. Luffy wasn't paying attention. She swallowed her food again. Are you sure we can be pirates with just the two of us? Zoro asked. Luffy nodded. Of course we can. We're strong. And when I get the rest of my crew, we'll be unstoppable. Luffy smiled. Zoro high-fived her. Now that sounds like a plan. He smirked. After causing yet another scene with the Marines, Luffy and Zoro found themselves waving to Kobe as they left the island. Kobe and the Marines saluted. Zoro sat back and chuckled. What? Luffy asked, jumping on the small ship's head. Are you always so friendly with the Marines? Zoro asked. Luffy smiled. Will, my boyfriend's a Marine. Akira-kun. Luffy smiled wider, running through the memories she had with the older brown-haired boy. Zoro looked at her. You don't seem like the type who would have a boyfriend. He yawned. Luffy turned. Well, he's not real, I'm boyfriend. Luffy explained. Ace had awkwardly explained the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship when Luffy got older. He just likes it when I call him that. I haven't seen him in forever though, Luffy shrugged. Zoro shook his head. You really are strange. He yawned again. Luffy jumped over and laid next to him. And you sound tired. Your yawning is making me sleepy. Luffy yawned herself, then dozed off. Zoro yawned again. He was tired. And it was getting late. Luffy muttered something in her sleep and leaned over onto him. He felt her tail swish on the ground when he attempted to push her away. He rolled his eyes. And finally went to sleep. Luffy barked at Zoro. Zoro opened one eye and closed it again. Luffy barked again. Zoro opened an eye and stared at her. Her ears were down and her tail was swishing around. He sighed. What? Zoro sat and faced her. I'm hungry. Luffy yipped. Zoro sighed. Well, we ate all the food. You ate most of it though, Zoro said, looking back at the small cabin. A caw came from up above the two. Zoro ignored it. Luffy, on the other hand, had her ears perked and was sniffing the air. Bird. She smiled. Zoro laid back. Yeah, and how do you plan on getting it? He asked. Luffy played the helpless animal. She whined and yipped and barked in pretend pain. The bird swooped down to take her as its prey. Luffy went to slash it. Zoro opened an eye when nothing crashed against the ship. He heard frantic screaming. He jumped up and looked to the sky. Zoro! Help! It got my tail! Ow ow ow! Luffy squealed. Zoro rode quickly after his captain. Luffy squirmed. Let me go, you stupid bird! Luffy yelled. She scratched it with her claws. The bird let her go. It glared at her as she fell. No, wait! I'm sorry! I didn't mean it! Don't let me drown! She yelled at the bird as she fell through the sky. The bird swooped down and caught her on its back. Luffy smiled. Thank you. Then, she saw an island. I'll be out of your feathers now. She jumped down onto the island. Crazy kid, the bird cawed. Luffy laughed as she landed on something hard and bumpy. Nami was dragging her treasure bags across the town when something plopped out of nowhere and landed on her bag. She fell over at the sudden weight. She turned and glared at the intruder. Thank you? Bird-san. Now, I gotta find Zoro. The black-haired girl stood and brushed herself off. Nami turned, ready to give this girl a piece of her mind. Instead, she was hit in the face by a fluffy red tail. She pushed the fluffiness aside and stood. Hey! She yelled. Oh. Hi! The girl smiled. Nami noticed she had fox ears, a tail, and red eyes. I'm Luffy, she said. Nami stood back. What's with your outfit? Nami asked, yanking on one of the ears. Ow, ow, ow. Luffy squealed, then she growled and jumped back, tail bristling with anger and annoyance. Don't do that. Are you stupid or something? Luffy yelled, fangs barred. Nami held her hands up. Whoa, sit puppy. I didn't know they were real. Nami picked up her treasure bag and tossed Luffy a piece of gold. Here, now beat it, kid. She pointed. Luffy angrily followed Nami. Hey! Gold isn't the same as apologizing. And you can't call me a kid. I'm almost as old as you. Luffy growled. Nami looked over at her. Yes, but I'm older, making you a kid. A weird one, but still a kid. Nami shrugged. Luffy grabbed Nami's arm and slammed the gold back in her hand. Keep this. It's not the same as an apology, Luffy said. Nami shrugged, slipping the gold in her pocket. This girl was a bit aggravating. Most people would have just took the money and left. But this girl, she was sticking around. Nami finally turned. Fine. I'm sorry. I really am, she said. Luffy still wasn't satisfied. What now? She asked. Luffy smiled. I forgive you, but you never told me your name, Luffy said. Nami rolled her eyes. I'm Nami, she said. Luffy smiled. Well, now I forgive you. Nami smirked. Maybe this girl wasn't all that bad. Nami started walking with her. So who's this Zoro guy you're looking for? She asked. Oh, he's my first mate. Roronoa Zoro. Luffy nodded. Wait. That demon pirate hunter. Why'd he join your crew? Nami asked. I saved his life. Luffy shrugged. Nami nodded. But then the other thing hit. First mate? This small fox-like girl was a pirate? Scratch that about her not being too bad. Nami looked at Luffy and had to ask. You're a pirate? Sure am. Luffy answered with enthusiasm. Nami was lost in thought. Luffy was a pirate. Luffy was nice. Luffy was a pirate. Luffy didn't take her gold. Luffy was a pirate. Yet all she wanted was an apology. A strange pirate indeed. Suddenly, the girls were surrounded by some pirates. Shit! Nami yelled. Luffy looked around. Who are they? She asked. I stole from them a little bit ago. Stay close, this might be trouble, Nami said. Luffy laughed at her. Nami looked at her. You really think I can't beat them myself? Then, Luffy sprung into action. Nami was surprised. She felt a weight on her head. Luffy was balancing on one hand on the ginger's head. This may hurt a bit, bear with me. Luffy started spinning on Nami's head. It didn't hurt. It was just Luffy messing up her hair. Kitsu tornado. Luffy spun, claws shooting out of her feet and impaling the pirate's shoulders. She hopped down and started running at an almost blinding speed. She got down on all fours, and Nami could barely keep up with her movements. Luffy was so swift and agile, it was almost unreal. Nami did, however, see the men go flying into buildings. She let out a breath of relief. Then, Luffy was standing in front of her. Thanks, Luffy. Nami smirked. No issue. Luffy smiled. Then the girls were walking back to the shore again. Hey, I know a way to get treasure, lots of it. Nami smiled greedily. Sounds great. I'll help you out. Luffy smiled. Nami was carrying a caged Luffy. The black-haired girl was in her full transformation, paws, ears, tail, red eyes, claws, and pointy teeth. Why am I in a cage? Luffy asked. I need you to play the helpless cub act. Just till I get enough treasure. Nami shrugged. Luffy smiled. I can do that. She grinned. Nami nodded. Good fox, she said as they boarded a ship. Buggy the clown stared at the girl fox thing he was presented with. He had to admit, it was quite adorable. But he wasn't sure if it was a costume. This girl, Nami, assured him that it wasn't. Show me proof, Buggy demanded. See for yourself. Nami opened the cage and brought the smaller girl out. Hiya, Luffy smirked. Kabeji, Buggy called. A man walked over and stared at Luffy. What's this? He asked. The girl claims this is a fox hybrid. Confirm it, Buggy said. Kabeji smirked creepily at Luffy before saying, Gladly. Kabeji, with a big smile on his face, strode over to Luffy, who stared up at him with curiosity. When he was kicked away, Luffy looked over and saw a familiar green head of hair. Zoro! She smiled. Zoro had come at just the right moment. He grabbed Luffy's hand. What are you doing here? He asked. Luffy was about to answer when Zoro pulled her to his side. He hissed in pain as a knife cut through his other side. Are you okay? Luffy said, concerned. Zoro nodded. Yeah, let's just get out of here, he said, grabbing Luffy's hand and running for the edge of the ship. Luffy turned back. Nami, come on, she yelled. Nami looked back and forth, then she followed the two pirates off and away from the ship. Luffy was pawing at the cut on Zoro's side. Ow! Luffy! Quit it! She shooed her away. Luffy sat down, her ears were pressed down. I'm sorry. Are you sure you're okay? She asked. I'm fine. I just need a nap. Zoro yawned. He laid on the ground and started snoring. Luffy smiled. Oh. Okay. I'll nap with you. She crawled over and curled up next to him, using her tail as a fluffy blanket. He looked up. You want a nap too, Nami? She yawned, rubbing her eyes. Nami shook her head. No. I don't nap, Nami said. Luffy shrugged. Nami soon heard the soft snoring of the pirates. She sighed. They were such an unusual pair. Then something barked at her. She turned and saw a dog. Shoo! She waved a hand at it. It barked again. Nami groaned. She noticed Luffy was awake up now, resting her head on her hands and Zoro's chest. She glanced over at Nami. Back up. That's what the dog says. Luffy yawned. The dog barked. Luffy nodded. He says you're too close to my master's shop, Luffy translated. You can understand it? Nami asked in awe. Not at him, Luffy said. She was very touchy about animals. Nami sighed. She moved a bit forward. The dog continued to sit in front of the store. Luffy was asleep again. Nami was drifting off to when a man approached them. Nami looked at the old man. Who might you three children be? The man asked. I'm Nami, the sleeping people are pirates. Luffy and Zoro. Nami explained. I'm not with them. The man looked over. Oh. This man is badly hurt, he said, noticing the deep cut on Zoro's side. I can keep him in a house just across the way if you'd like. The old man offered. Do what you want, I'm not with them, Nami said again. But she was mostly trying to convince herself. The man moved the sleeping Luffy and half-dragged Zoro into a house. Nami felt the ground shake. She looked up and a giant lion was looking down on her. She looked to the side. Luffy was still asleep. The dog started barking. How cute. It's trying to protect this dump. Richie would love a treat, wouldn't you, boy? The man on top of the lion laughed. The lion roared. Nami didn't know what to do. Her only protection was asleep on the ground. Luffy, Nami muttered. The lion raised its paw. Nami ran behind it. Luffy, wake up, she shouted. The small girl yawned and stretched. Nami? She muttered before the lion used its paw to fling her across town into a large tower. The mayor came out. What's going on? He yelled. Luffy. Nami ran in the direction of the small pirate. The mayor ran after her. Nami, though. Why did she care? It's not like, oh my god! Luffy. Nami ran faster when she saw the tower in shambles. She pushed rocks away and saw a fluffy red ball. The red fluffy shrunk until it revealed Luffy laying on the ground. Nami? What happened? Luffy asked, standing up. Nami hit her. You idiot! She yelled. Wow, you shouldn't be alive right now, little girl. The mayor gasped. Luffy shrugged. My fur is super defensive. She smiled, then she saw smoke coming from the pet store. We need to hurry though. The three nodded and ran back. Luffy beat the lion and the man no issue, but the pet shop was destroyed. The dog was sad. It whimpered. Ah, don't be sad. Here, look. Luffy sniffed around and found a bag of food. See? The dog barked. Yep. You got it. She tossed the bag and the dog caught it. Then Zoro came out of the house. Luffy? He yawned. Luffy waved. Zoro. She ran over. You all better now? She asked. Not completely healed, but good enough. Why? He asked, staggering slightly. Luffy held him up. Cause a certain clown needs his butt kicked. Luffy smirked. Sounds fun. Zoro smirked back. And the trio, and the mayor, who insisted he come along, all went to face Buggy. Luffy glared hard at Buggy. She stood tall with Zoro and Nami and the mayor. Buggy glared down at her. He had sent Kabeji down to kill her. Zoro was fighting him now. Nami was fending off some other pirates. Luffy charged at Buggy after knocking out the mayor so he wouldn't get hurt. Luffy broke off her claw. One sword style. She grinned. Slice Buggy who moved. She was surprised when he broke off a piece of his body and reconnecting it. He laughed at her confused face. Luffy smirked at a thought she had. She grew out her claws. What now? Buggy laughed at her. 6 sword style. Luffy exclaimed. She sliced Buggy with her 6 claws. Buggy simply broke into pieces. She pounced on his arm, holding it in her fangs. Buggy reassembled and glared at her when she bit down on his arm. He yelled in pain. Buggy glared. You and that stupid straw hat! He yelled. Luffy bit on his arm again. He wailed in pain. That hat, it's just like his. Buggy trailed off. That bastard Shanks! He yelled. Luffy glared, breaking his arm in her teeth. Don't call Shanks that! She yelled, spitting out the broken limb. She charged Buggy, shooting her claws, slicing, punching, kicking, and biting. Buggy broke apart, his bottom half running off somewhere so he could float freely. Nami saw the bottom half of Buggy the clown. She saw Luffy struggling to beat him since he kept separating and dodging. Nami smirked evilly, kicking Buggy right between his legs. The top half of Buggy toppled over in front of Luffy. Luffy was confused then. She went to hit Buggy. Instead, one of his arms went to punch her. She moved but her hat was knocked off her head. Buggy took his sword and slammed it into the top of her hat. Luffy's eyes went wide. Buggy started stomping on the hat. What's so great about Shanks? He yelled. Luffy glared. Zoro was fighting Kabeji. You seem every attached to my pet, Kabeji said, referring to Luffy. Zoro glared. She's not a pet. I won't allow you to harm my captain. Zoro growled. So noble. Kabeji mocked, stabbing Zoro in his wound. Zoro winced in pain and staggered back. After he collected himself and charged Kabeji. Zoro charged Kabeji, slicing him. The unicycle man toppled over and fainted. Zoro sheathed his swords. You're miles away from beating me, Zoro muttered. Then he found a spot on the ground and fell asleep. He heard Luffy's angry scream and opened an eye. Her hat was stomped into the ground. Buggy had obviously done it. Luffy wasn't happy. Her tail was swishing, puffed in anger. Her ears were flat against her head. Her claws tapped against her leg. Why, she growled. Then she let out a loud bark. She didn't know how, but the bark sent out a sound wave. Buggy blocked his ears as he flew backwards. She kicked at him and he broke into pieces again. Give up! Buggy yelled. You cheating bastard! Luffy snapped, biting at some arms and legs, scratching at his chest and face. Buggy glared down. Stupid girl! You think you can beat me with this timid devil's fruit of yours? He laughed. Luffy glared. Nami had tied up some of Buggy's parts. When the clown man reassembled, he was a torso with hands and feet. He screamed when he saw Nami had his other parts. Kitsun Kitsun, Luffy's tail grew a bit. Tail bomb! She whacked Buggy with her tail. The tail puffed out, making a large boom noise, and Buggy was sent flying far away. His crew sailed after him yelling, Captain Buggy! Luffy picked up her hat. She unsmashed it and sighed at the hole that was in it. She put it on her head anyway, her ear sticking through the hole that was bigger than usual. Then the villagers came. What have you done to the mayor? They yelled when they saw the mayor unconscious on the ground. Nami tried to explain, but no one was listening. The villagers drove them away with anger. So the three were in the ship, on their way to their next location. Wherever that was. Nami counted her money. 1 bag of treasure, 5 million belly. The next treasure bag. Nami looked all over the place. She couldn't find it. Where? she asked. Luffy, have you seen my treasure bag? Nami asked the small fox-like girl. Oh, I left it at the shore for the villagers so they could rebuild. She smiled. Nami's eye twitched. You did what? She yelled. She grabbed Luffy by the ear. Ow! Nami! Ow! Stop! Luffy whimpered. Then Nami yanked on her tail, shoving her head into the water. You little fool! Nami yelled. Nami! Stop it! Luffy started clawing at Nami's arm. How dare you fight back? Nami yelled. Luffy finally got herself up, met by Zoro's laughter. After Nami calmed down, she looked over to Luffy. The younger girl was staring in dismay at the hole in her hat. Give it here. Nami sighed. Luffy looked over. Then she nodded, handing the hat to Nami. Nami studied it for a moment. I can fix it. She smiled at Luffy, who jumped up with a loud bark. Really? You can? Luffy yipped, tail wagging with happiness. Nami nodded and went to work. After the hat was fixed, it was night. The crew yawned and went to sleep. It was the next day that they came to an island. Zoro sat on a rock, watching his captain jet back and forth on the sand. Nami was scouting to see what she could find. Come on, Zoro! Play tag with me! Luffy begged, running around him at a blinding speed. Zoro grunted when she stopped in front of him. Like I could catch you, Captain? He knocked her hat over her eyes. Luffy pouted. Zoro's mean. She stuck out her tongue before going back to her exploring. Nami came back about an hour later. Zoro was asleep and Luffy was laying on the sand, waiting. Nami! Luffy smiled. Well, there's a town nearby. Just follow me. She smiled. Luffy turned and pounced on the sleeping swordsman. Get up, Zoro! She demanded. The green-haired man shot up and sent an icy glare to his hyperactive captain, who just pulled him up and smiled. Nami giggled at the two. Hurry up! Luffy! She yelled. Coming, Nami! Luffy tugged Zoro along as they walked after the navigator. No one noticed the panicked notions of the small boy who ran off into the forest. Later, Luffy and Zoro were lost. And it wasn't something like, Luffy! Don't go ahead! Nami yelled at the girl who was bounding on all fours through the forest they were in. Luffy sniffed the air. Someone was nearby. She turned and jetted off in the direction of the scent. Luffy! Nami yelled, her voice falling flat in the dense forest. She sighed and turned. Come on, Zoro, let's get. She opened her eyes to see no one was behind her. Zoro! She grabbed her hair, frustrated. Meanwhile, Zoro was back at the beach. How the hell did those two get lost? He shook his head and continued to walk aimlessly back into the forest. So now, a very frustrated Nami, an adventurous Luffy, and a very lost Zoro were all in the forest, only one knowing which way was which. Luffy followed the scent. So different, but so familiar! She exclaimed, sniffing more of the surrounding air. I've smelt this before. She inhaled before smiling. Found you! She jetted to the side and pounced on the person in who was hiding in the bush. They struggled, but Luffy locked their waists down and pined their arms by digging her claws into the ground. She growled defensively. Ah! Please, Miss Fox. Don't eat me! The person screamed. Luffy's eyes adjusted to the bush's shade and she saw a boy. He was tan, had scared brown eyes, was wearing overalls, had curly brown hair and a long nose. Luffy stood and held him in place with a claw through his pants leg. I don't eat humans, that's gross. Luffy stuck out her tongue in disgust. You can talk! The boy screamed. Of course I can talk. Wait, hey. You're not a fox. You're a girl. No duh. Luffy crossed her arms and her ears flattened onto her head. Her tail swished in annoyance of being mistaken for an animal. Sorry. I'm Luffy. Luffy pulled her claw out of his pants leg and stood. I'm Usopp. Usopp cautiously stood to look over the girl in front of him who had just retracted her tail and fox ears. She was pretty, not as pretty as Kaya, but close. She was short, had neck-length black hair. Her legs were long but disappeared after the hem of her knee-length shorts. She had a red button-down vest on that looked like it was too small for her, even though it wasn't, a scar under her eye and a straw hat atop her head. Can you show me the way to town? I think I'm lost. Luffy smiled. Sure, who are you again? Usopp asked. Monkey D. Luffy. The future pirate king, Luffy stated proudly. Usopp froze. You're a pirate? Sure am. I'm captain. She beamed. I was sure that green-haired one was captain. What did you say? Nothing. Well, show me. Show you what? The way to town, of course. Yeah, right this way. Luffy. Where'd you go? Usopp winced at the loud voice. Luffy spun around. Zoro. She smiled. The annoyed swordsman pushed his way through some bushes. Zoro scowled at the branches. Where have you been? Getting lost like that? Zoro said. I don't know. I have no idea what I'd do if you didn't find me. Luffy smiled at her first mate, who grinned. Well, you're lucky I was around. Now let's go, he said. Usopp leaned over to Luffy. You're lost? He whispered. No, but Zoro was, just go along with it. Luffy giggled and followed her first mate. Come on, Usopp, Luffy called as Zoro walked in a random direction. You're going the wrong way, Usopp yelled, running after them. After an hour, the trio got to the town where Nami was at a fence waiting around. She looked up. Luffy. Zoro, she said in surprise, then she stomped over and conked them both hard. I thought I told you idiots to follow me, she yelled. Devil Zoro muttered under his breath while Luffy whimpered, holding her head. Usopp winced at the third crewmate who glared at him. Thanks for finding my idiot captain and her moronic first mate, she sighed. And no problem, Usopp muttered. Hey! Luffy and Zoro shouted at the insult. Nami just waved it off. I'm starving, Luffy muttered. Oh! Well, follow me then. Usopp smiled a nervous smile. The crew and Usopp sat at a restaurant. Nami finished her food and watched in disgust as Luffy chowed down on plate after plate, and Zoro chugged down multiple bottles of sake. Usopp got up after a while. HM? Where are you going? Nami asked. Just home. It was nice meeting you guys, just tell them to put the food on my tab. Usopp yelled as he ran out the door. Luffy swallowed her food as she watched him go. They sat around a bit longer as Luffy finished her food off. 3 boys came in yelling about pirates, then they saw Luffy, Nami, and Zoro. Pirates! They yelled. What have you done to our captain? One yelled. Your captain? Nami chuckled. Our captain ate him. She grinned. Which? The boys pointed at Nami. Later, the 3 boys had bumps on their heads and Luffy was laughing along with Zoro. The boys sniffled. Where is our captain? One asked. He left. Luffy shrugged. Do you think he went there? Another boy turned to the first one. It is that time of day. Let's go, the third one said. We'll come too. Luffy climbed over Zoro and stretched as she stood on the ground. Zoro stood. Sure, why not? We do need to see if we can get a ship. Zoro yawned. Well, Kaya's the richest person in the village. One boy nodded. Is that so? Nami smirked as she pushed everyone out the restaurant. Luffy stood at the front gate of a large house, her hands on her hips. The guard refused to let them inside. She pouted. How do we get in? She turned to look at the boys who weren't there anymore. Now they had to find a way in on their own. We could fight our way through, Zoro suggested. No! We can't cause a scene, Nami said, then she went to thinking. She glanced at Luffy. The younger girl yawned and her fangs poked out of her mouth a bit. She was idly running her hand along her fluffy tail, while the other scratched her chest. Her ears were pressed against her head as she thought. Nami smirked. Hey Luffy, she grinned evilly. Luffy shrunk back instinctively at the vibe she was getting from Nami. Yeah? Luffy asked. Nami reached out and Luffy ran. A little bit later Nami had Luffy by the cheek. Now you have to do exactly as I say. Understand? She said. Ow. Nami! Let go! Luffy whined. Understand? Nami asked again. Yes. I'll do whatever you say. She whined. Nami smiled. Good. Then she leaned over. Zoro yawned, looking over as Nami whispered instructions into Luffy's ear. Luffy's face was curious, her eyes darting at Nami every once in a while. Luffy looked over at Nami. Are you sure? She asked with a weird expression. Positive. Give it a go. Nami pushed Luffy towards the gate. Luffy stood, thinking about what Nami had said. She had her tail out, she took off her hat and placed it carefully on a rock. Her dark hair fell down her back and over her shoulders. She perked up her fox ears and walked over to the guards. What did Nami say? Luffy went through it before speaking. Could I go through? She shyly crossed her arms in front of her, entwining her fingers with her own, matching the move to the words like Nami had said. No can do, miss. The guard spoke. Luffy pouted, like Nami had said to do if she got this answer. Then she looked up, walking a bit closer to the guard. She set a hand on his chest, letting the tip of her tail run along his face, like Nami said. Please, she said, as softly as Nami said to. The guard's face went red. I really want to get inside, Luffy muttered, looking at the ground, her free hand playing with her hair. If it's that I important, the guard was stuttering. Luffy didn't understand why he was doing that, but she grabbed her own tail, hugging it and smiling at him. Thank you, she said. Nami and Zoro followed her as she went inside. Luffy thought about what Nami had made her do. Nami called this a game called seduction. Luffy was beginning to like this game. Nami said Luffy could get whatever she wanted if she played the game right. Why hadn't Ace and Sabo told her about this? Whatever she wanted, maybe this game would work on Ace. Luffy smiled as she waved to the 3 boys that were gathered under a tree. Zoro seemed angry. Luffy led them all to the tree. They looked up and saw Usopp talking to some girl. Ahoy! Usopp! Luffy waved. El Luffy! Usopp fell out the tree. Luffy bounced impatiently on the head of the ship. Are we there yet? She asked, ear twitching in anticipation. Not yet, Zoro said for the 100th time. He was currently leaning against the rail in front of the heading. Usopp was messing around with a cannon a little ways off. Luffy turned to look at him, slipping off the heading and running over. What are you doing, Usopp? She asked, sniffing at the cannon. Usopp pushed her away. I'm working on a new cannon, wanna see? He asked. Luffy nodded. Yeah. Luffy smiled, all boredom and impatience forgotten. Usopp was panicking. Luffy! Don't stop! He was yelling. Luffy was using her tail to hold him away. Fire! She yelled, aiming at a rock. It hit the side of the rock, sending a boat into the air. Luffy let her tail slide away from Usopp. She watched the boat fly up and crash onto the deck of the boat. A man staggered up from the boat, glaring at Usopp. What the hell? He yelled, picking up a sword. Usopp screamed. Luffy pounced on the man. It was my fault, she said. The man looked up at Luffy, suddenly calm. Hello? He stuttered as Luffy let him up. Hiya. Luffy smiled, her ears perking up. Luffy's tail was on her lap, and she was sitting and smiling at the man in front of her. He let out a yell. So adorable. He pulled Luffy into a hug. Ah. Luffy yelped in surprise as he stroked her tail. So soft. He cooed. Luffy pulled her tail away. You're very strange, she said, puffing out her cheeks. Yeah, well, the man stopped. Feeling a strong killing intent, he looked up from Luffy. Standing above her was something that looked like a demon. The man screamed. Luffy looked back. Oh. Zoro. She smiled. Zoro lifted her up by her shirt collar and moved her behind him. He pulled out his sword. The man was sniffling and screaming in fear when he stopped and held up his hands. Wait. Zoro? It's me, he yelled. Zoro took a closer look. Johnny? Zoro said. Usopp came out from behind Zoro. You know this guy? He asked. Yeah. Zoro put his sword away. Luffy smiled from Zoro to Johnny. Cool. She smiled. Zoro. It's Yusaku. Johnny suddenly started bawling, rushing to the other man that was unconscious on the deck. Luffy looked at the man lying on the deck. Is he dead? She asked. Of course not, Luffy. He's just unconscious, Usopp said. Johnny continued to bawl. He's been sick for days. What do I do? Zoro. He turned to hug the green-haired man who sent him a hard glare, making him turn to Luffy and hug her tightly. It's all right. Nami's smart, she'll know what to do, Luffy said as the air filled with the smell of tangerines and bath water. What's going on out here? Nami crossed her arms. Luffy slipped away from Johnny and pointed to Yusaku. That guy's dead, she said. Unconscious, Usopp yelled. Let me see Nami's side, kneeling next to Luffy. After a quick evaluation, Nami stood. He has scurvy, Usopp. Go get the bucket of limes. Nami waved him off. A mystery sickness, Luffy breathed. Must be, Zoro agreed. Nami hit them both. Yusaku was cheering with Usopp, Luffy, and Johnny a few moments later before collapsing once more. He died, Luffy deduced. He fainted. Johnny and Usopp yelled. Luffy giggled. Okay then. She skipped back to the front of the ship where Zoro was napping near the head. Luffy climbed her way back onto the head and smiled at the sea ahead. She stood quickly when she saw the Baratie in the distance. Look! I see it! Zoro, come here! Luffy yelled. Zoro yawned and climbed his way up, looking and nodding. That's great. I'm going back to sleep. He yawned, about to slide down when a marine battleship blasted by, sending a big wave to the boat that rocked violently. Ah! Luffy slipped of the heading. Damn! Sorry about this, Mary. Zoro stuck his sword in the heading and swung himself out to catch Luffy as the boat stopped rocking. Luffy smiled. That was close. She slid off the heading and passed Usopp, who started to yell at Zoro. Luffy yelled up to Nami. Hey! Speed up the boat. Nami! She yelled. What do you think I'm doing? Nami snapped at the girl. Go faster. Luffy ignored her, running back to the ship's heading. It was about an hour later when they docked next to the marine battleship. What's going on? A voice came. Some pirates docked next to us. A marine that was standing near the railing snickered at the ship. Nothing to worry about, it's just a dinky little thing. My ship is not dinky. Luffy stood up and yelled. Yeah. Kai gave us this ship. It's the best ship ever. Usopp shouted. What's with the ruckus? A voice yelled. Captain the Marine bowed a bit and moved aside. Luffy glared at the empty space, waiting for the captain to show his face. He finally stood in front of her. He was wearing a black tank top and jeans with the captain cape placed on his shoulders. He had green eyes and brown hair that fell to his upper neck and nearly covered his eyes. He was a little bit tanned and he stared at Luffy. A smirk crossed his face as he leaned over the railing. What seems to be the problem, miss? He asked. Nothing. Just about to bash that guy's face in for making fun of my ship. Luffy yelled at him. The man nodded. Zoro looked at this marine captain who was no older than Luffy, and was attempting to hit on his currently angry captain. Well, to make up for my insensitive crew member, why don't I treat you to lunch here at the Baratie? The young captain asked. No way. Who'd wanna eat with you? Luffy stuck out her tongue and Zoro grinned. The marine captain's face fell. Now, that's no way to speak to your boyfriend. The man smiled. Luffy was silent, studying the man's eyes and face. Boyfriend. Both pirates and marines were in shock. And you will speak nothing of it. The marine captain said to his crew. They exchanged glances and nodded. What's he talking about, Luffy? Nami called. Yeah. Usopp nudged her. So this is your boyfriend? Zoro said in disgust. A marine captain? Akira-kun? Luffy said. The one and only. Akira smiled. Luffy hopped down onto the deck and motioned for the man claiming to be Akira to come to her. The young captain hopped over to her ship and stood. Luffy cautiously approached him. She looked into his eyes. She felt his hair, sniffed the air around him, and walked around him. The man smiled. Well? He asked. Luffy stood with a straight face. You could be Akira, you smell and look the same, more or less, she thought. How old was I when you first met me? I believe you were 6. The man smiled. Okay. Where did you meet me? The Goa Kingdom. You were in the process of a dine and dash. He chuckled. Then we play tag. He poked Luffy's stomach. I saved your friend from drowning by carrying you out into the sea. He kept going each time Luffy attempted to ask another question. You think my mom is weird and you lived in a tree house in the mountains with 2 other people. He finished. Luffy let a huge smile cross her face. Akira-kun. She jumped into his open arms. It really is you. It's been forever, she said, tail wagging in happiness. Yeah, it has. So? Wanna go eat? He asked. Course I do. But come meet my crew first. She grabbed his hand and dragged him to the center of the deck. Zoro, Usopp and Nami all stared as Luffy brought the Marine captain over. Guys. This is my old friend Akira-kun. She smiled. He a Marine? Usopp said cautiously. Yeah, but he won't report us. Will you? Luffy looked at him. I wouldn't dream of it. Akira smiled. See. Luffy climbed on his back. Akira. She pointed to her first mate. That's Roronoa Zoro, he's my first mate. Then to her navigator. That's Nami, she said she'd be with us for a while. Then she pointed to the cowering boy. And that's Usopp. He's Yasopp's son. She said. Akira nodded. Nice to meet you, he said. The crew nodded and Luffy smiled and hopped down. Come here. Let me show you something cool. Luffy pulled at Akira's cape and brought him to the cannon. She pulled the rope. Luffy! Usopp yelled. But the cannon hit a nearby rock and the rock exploded and one piece slammed itself into the restaurant. Oops, Luffy said. Akira sighed. You really haven't changed? Okay. Come on. He pulled her off the ship and into the restaurant. I'll be back, Luffy called to her crew. Akira walked in with Luffy behind him. A blonde waiter was walking down the stairs to see what the commotion was. You, sir. Akira waved at the waiter. The waiter came over, puffing out smoke from his cigarette. Luffy stepped out from behind Akira to look around. The waiter blew a heart-shaped puff of smoke out and swirled to Luffy. What wonder of beauty do I have in front of me to be viewed by my unworthy eyes? If there's a god, he must be smiling down on me today to bring me a lady of such caliber. He stopped and knelt in front of Luffy. I am Sanji. Who might you be? He asked. I'm Luffy. Nice to meet you. She smiled. Melorine. Sanji swirled. Such a heavenly smile. The noodle dance he started made Luffy laugh. Sanji's funny. She giggled. Akira's eye twitched. Anyway, he said loudly, my girlfriend and I are looking for the owner. He glared and stretched out the word girlfriend to Sanji, whose face fell slightly. At that moment, a door swung open. You too. In here now. A large old man yelled. Come on, Luffy-chan. Akira grabbed Luffy's hand and pulled her away from Sanji. Why'd you say that? I thought we weren't really girlfriend and boyfriend, Luffy said. Because you were mine first, Akira muttered. What? Just refer to me as your boyfriend while we're here, okay? Akira smiled. Luffy shrugged it off and smiled. Okay. She walked faster, keeping in step with Akira. Inside the small office that had a large hole in the ceiling and a large rock on the floor, Akira intended reasoned with the owner of Baratie, Zeph. Who are you two? Zeph asked. I'm Luffy. Nice to meet you. Luffy tipped her hat. I'm Akira, Marine Captain, Akira said, hoping to gain some respect. Well, I don't care if you're the Marine Admiral. No one messes with my restaurant and gets off punishment free. Zeph pointed at them both. I'm very sorry. It was my fault. Luffy bowed. I'm sure I can pay off Luffy-chan's debt, Akira offered. No. Zeph shook his head. No? Akira inquired. She has to pay it off herself. Zeph looked at Luffy. I'm broke. She smiled. Don't say it with confidence. Akira sighed. Then you'll work. The owner pulled out a waitress uniform and shook it out, tossing it Luffy's way. The crew was currently sitting down at a table eating some of the food from the famous Baratie kitchen. Luffy seemed to be taking her sweet time apologizing and the crew was starting to get suspicious. What if that guy turned her in? Usopp exclaimed. Luffy can handle herself, Zoro assured, sipping his water again. Then a door creaked open. The restaurant was muttering. The crew looked to the door. Go Luffy-chan. A voice hissed and a girl was pushed out. Luffy was standing, embarrassed. Her outfit was red with a white apron, she had her black hair tied up in a red bow and her bangs fell in front of her eyes. Her hat was sitting on her side, nearly hidden. She was looking down at a notepad, her ears were out and down, and her tail was swishing. She looked up and most people gasped. Luffy! Usopp gasped. She looks great. Nami grinned. On orders? Luffy asked. Half the place erupted. Akira's eye twitched. Miss, over here. Come over this way. I'm done with my food. The fox girl was getting called left and right. Yeah. Coming. Okay, Zoro. Luffy spotted the green head and ran to the table, grumbled of lucky and green-haired bastard brought the room back to normal. Zoro sighed. When Luffy glared at the table. You guys are eating without me, she yelled. Then, a certain blonde-haired chef spun down the stairs and knelt before Luffy. You look adorable. Luffy-chuan. He swooned. The hell is that? Zoro muttered. Akira stormed out the room he was sitting in next. He was glaring daggers at Sanji, the boy who was no more muscular than Usopp, just an inch or two over Luffy, but somehow a marine captain looked as if he was about to show the blonde chef just how he earned that title. Sanji and Akira were fighting. Luffy's mine! Akira shouted angrily, punching Sanji in the stomach once more. Ag! Bastard! Sanji licked Akira in the chest, sending him flying back. Akira got up and charged him, continuing the fight. Well, maybe fighting wasn't the right word. Akira punched Sanji and Sanji kicked Akira, both of the wrestling angrily until owner Zeph came out yelling at the two to break it up. He sent Sanji back to work while Akira apologized repeatedly. Sorry, Akira rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, looking down and away from Luffy. Usopp and Nami exchanged looks as Zoro glared a bit at Akira. They smirked and slid back to get a good view of the show. It's okay, Akira-kun. Luffy smiled at him, sitting down in the chair next to Zoro and wrapping her tail around her waist. Back to work, Zeph shouted as soon as Luffy was comfortable. Kia! Luffy shot up and ran off, going back to taking orders and being oogled at by the males in the restaurant. Akira sent them all a glare that usually made them stop staring. Perverted cowards, he muttered, flopping down in the seat that Luffy was sitting in before. Luffy had disappeared. So Nami leaned over. So Usopp did the same. Akira blinked at the two of them, backing away from them a little in confusion. You're Luffy's boyfriend? Nami raised an eyebrow in devious curiosity. Yeah, I mean, not really. Akira muttered, looking away. Not really? Usopp asked. Yeah, I mean, I asked her out when we were kids, and she said yes. But I don't think she really knew what a boyfriend was, so I'm not really her boyfriend, he explained with a red face. Nami nodded in understanding, then smiled. That's so adorable. You should ask her out again. Nami shook him. Zoro glanced over. Usopp noticed and nudged Nami, who giggled. No one else is gonna do it, she said, purposely looking at Zoro, who sent her a glare. Just then the doors opened. Help! Please! I'm starving! A dirty old pirate was in the doorway, on his knees. Do you have any money? Zeph asked the man. And no, sir. The man stuttered weakly. Zeph turned away. Sanji, he called, walking over to the stairs where the cook was coming down from the kitchen. Deal with him, Zeph said before walking back into his office. Sanji blew out a puff of smoke from his cigarette and nodded, walking over to the pirate and whispering something to him. Ayek, the pirate muttered, making his way out the door while Sanji closed it. The blonde cook left, making his way to the back, hair covering his eye as he walked. Usopp watched Sanji go. They just sent that hungry guy away? Nami whispered. I guess so, he was a pirate, and he didn't have any money. Usopp muttered. Zoro simply shrugged and let out a sigh. Not everyone has a kind heart like you do, Zoro said to Nami, who sent him a hard glare. Money and food are two different things. She hissed at him, causing the boys to both laugh. Nami sat back in her seat and pouted. Ah, well, cooks may think food and money are the same, Akira pointed out. Nami and Usopp nodded. Probably, Usopp said. Zoro silently agreed. Akira looked around. Hey, where did Luffy go? Luffy had escaped onto the roof of the Baratie. She laid up there to avoid doing any more work for the day, even though she knew she needed to pay off that debt. Working was just so hard. Her tail swished in the air as she rolled onto her stomach, her ears twitching in her straw hat. She sighed when she heard the back door open. She peered over the edge of the roof, ears flat against her hat-covered head in case it was the owner, come out to yell at her again. Sanji had told the hungry pirate to go out back and meet him there. There he was, sitting, leaning against the fence with a small raft tied up behind him. Thank you so much, he said as Sanji handed him a bowl of soup, which he greedily gobbled down, happy to have his stomach filled again. What brings you here? Sanji asked. Well, our crew goes stuck in the still waters of the Grand Line. We ran out of food, but I managed to row myself here, he said. Sanji nodded. Sanji? While Luffy poked her head up so the two could see her. Luffy-chan. Sanji swirled. Fox girl? The pirate blinked. Yo! She smiled, jumping down to the floor. She smiled at Sanji. Join my crew, she requested. Sanji blinked. What? He asked. Join my crew. Luffy smiled widely. Sanji blinked at her again. Oh, I can't, I'm sorry, Luffy-chan. Sanji gave her a soft smile. Luffy's face fell. She stared at Sanji. Please? She asked. I can't, Luffy-chan. Sanji dismayed, acting as if he took a hit to the heart. Luffy pouted. You're a pirate? The man on the ground asked. Yep. My crew and I are heading to the Grand Line. She smiled at him. The man blinked and laughed as he got back into his boat. You be careful, and I know you won't, but stay away from the Grand Line, he said, untying his boat and rowed away. I'm going anyway. Bye. Luffy waved after him, turning back to Sanji. Luffy smiled. Join my crew, she yelled again. I cannot, my dear, Sanji said for the third time, physically feeling his heart break. Luffy pouted. Then she remembered the game Nami taught her. Seduction. Nami said she could get whatever she wanted with that game. So it began. Luffy pressed herself up against Sanji, wrapping her tail around his waist and wrapping her arms around his neck, looking up at him with her best puppy dog eyes. Sanji, come please join my crew? She asked in a shy, soft voice. Sanji's face turned red and blood leaked out his nose as he placed his arms on Luffy's hips. Of course, my love, Sanji declared, his nose exploding with blood when Luffy pushed herself closer to him. He fell backwards into the sea. Huh? Sanji? Luffy blinked, looking over the edge. Holla Luffy, he mumbled, mixing in her name with a bunch of gibberish. You're funny, she laughed. It was an hour of Sanji and Luffy talking later that they heard a panic inside the Baratie. Give me all your food, a loud voice boomed. Luffy and Sanji exchanged looks and ran inside. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video? Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Pikachu Girl XX for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.